For context, I live in a very small trailer court, and directly next to us is a railway that goes across the whole state and leads to a Wally World if you head down for like 20 minutes. Now, I was a teenager in 8th grade at the time, with no car or transportation other than a bike. The railroad tracks go in a straight line directly leading to Walmart, so if I were to bike to the Walmart, it takes me about the same time as if I walk straight down the tracks. So, more often than not, I would walk, as I was never really a big fan of riding bikes, as I have had back issues since a young age. Now, on this date in particular, I decided to head to Walmart for dumb kid stuff shortly before the sun was about to set. Basically, I went to the store and got distracted just looking around, bought some food and drink and some trading cards, but left as the sun was going down. It's about a 20 to 25 minute walk home, and I decided to head down the tracks again. At about a 10-minute mark, it was getting very dark, and I was a generally fearful and anxious child due to my autism. I was scared of the dark until at least about 14 and a half, and would often have nightmares or see things that weren't there in my closet or dark corners, etc. So as it became too dark to see, I was getting extremely nervous and hypervigilant. 5 minutes later, I could have sworn that I was hearing footsteps crunching in the rocks lining these tracks that weren't mine. I stopped a few times to listen, and confirmed that someone was walking towards me from a significant distance away. I couldn't see them at this point because of the darkness and lack of lighting across the railroad tracks. I had no phone or flashlight of any kind either. I started freaking out internally. At first, I didn't know what to do. But as the sound of the footsteps got closer, I decided to call out and let them know that I was coming towards them. I stopped as I did this and said something along the lines of, "Is someone there?" While I know that this might seem silly as an adult, I was used to my brain playing tricks on me in the darkness, and at first I was convinced I was hearing things, and there was no response. At this point, the footsteps were getting closer, but still difficult to distinguish over my own. So I stopped. The footsteps, they continued for a brief moment, and then they stopped too. I called out again and I said, "Hello, is anyone there?" No response again. I was still prepubescent and I had a child's voice at the time, and I feel like any reasonable adult would have responded and said yes, or yeah, I'm just walking, or whatever, as I had genuine, noticeable fear in my voice. After I received no response again, I told myself that I was just imagining it, and continued on my journey, at this point being just under 15 minutes from my house. And then I heard them again, footsteps coming closer as soon as I started walking. Fear took over now, and I started yelling and making whooping sounds, thinking that it might be some sort of an animal. I yelled things like, "I know you're there and I have a knife," which was total BS, but I thought that it might encourage this person to respond. But still, nothing. A few times as I was speaking, I would hear the footsteps stop again. Finally, about 3 or 5 minutes later, stopping multiple times and hearing these footsteps stop. Sorry, I can't give a super specific time frame. I was in total fight or flight mode, scared out of my mind, so it gets a little hazy from here, but I start seeing this guy materialize out of the darkness. He had on blue jeans, a dark hoodie with a hood completely masking his face from a distance. I was instantly relieved for whatever reason. Relieved to know that I wasn't crazy, maybe. I don't know, and began verbal vomiting to this guy that I was just scared, and I didn't know that he was on the tracks. He again didn't respond though, and this was before like mainstream Bluetooth audio and all that, and I didn't see any headphone cables even when I passed him, so it wasn't like he was just like ignoring me because he was listening to music or something. But because he didn't respond, I was eyeing him warily as he approached, and we locked eyes at one point. And I will never forget the chill that ran down my spine. He was staring at me coldly and blankly, with a menacing look in his eyes, like he was thinking about what to do. He had his hands shoved in his pockets, and as I was passing him, he looked like he was going to pull something out with his right hand. I was a very scrawny kid, and even though I did have back problems, I was pretty quick still. I would just hurt from running for too long, but from then on, going down the tracks, I was at full sprint, and everything from this point on is just genuinely a blur. I know I tripped and fell twice, as well as soaked myself in mud when I tried to get across the small ditch separating the track from the trailer park, but eventually, I got home. I never told my mum, and I never walked on those tracks at night again after that. But the tracks, they're on an elevated hill next to the trailers, and you can either walk a minute in the wrong direction to get on it at the main road that I live on, or you can cut through this one small spot where some people had put a board down for that exact purpose, to get across the ditch and onto the tracks. The board, it was broken in half and partially submerged, so it was kind of like you had to sort of jump and land on the board with one foot and then kick off to the other side. The ditch, it's maybe about 3 feet across, so it's not a huge jump, but it always has nasty standing water in it. Once you get on the tracks, there's a super long stretch with absolutely no way off too, other than private property of a factory the railway delivers goods to, which you can get in trouble for trespassing on, obviously. But then there's a junction about 20 minutes down and another 5 minutes from there, which is where this Walmart is. Due to this, I couldn't just get off the tracks when I ran away. I had to get to the ditch before I would be able to, which all is to say that, really, I had to run from this guy because there was nowhere else to go. I recently had an unexplainable experience that I really don't know whether to classify as paranormal, creepy, or just really weird, because it feels like it sort of hits on all of them, I guess. To preface this, I'm a biologist and I'm skeptical of the paranormal and other cryptic notions, but keep an open mind that anything could be possible. But unless there is definitive proof from others or myself of such things, I won't believe such things are reality. With that said, here's what happened. So my colleagues and I were staying at a B&B in a rural part of Louisiana for a business trip, and on my final day there, I decided to explore the property of the owners. The property is a 26-acre plot of land, and the owners are also biologists and have created numerous trails and naturalist exhibits around the property that people will often explore. Something my colleagues and I were trying to do during our trip was to get to the creek that is on the property. It turns out it's far behind the house through dense woods, I would say about 3/4 of a mile behind the house and half a mile through a dense forest. After my co-workers tried and couldn't find the creek, due to a number of reasons, fire ant mounds, mosquitoes, and simply not finding it, I thought that I would try and find it to give me something to do. I'm very experienced in the outdoors, and bushwhacking is nothing new to me really, and I knew that I would likely find it with enough time and determination. I asked the owners the best way to get to the creek, and they gave me a trail to go on, but said that it would be unlikely for me to get to it because of downed trees from Hurricane Laura, which turned out to be the case in the end. Regardless though, I followed the trail they described, which ends at what I can best describe as an insect observation station. It's a cotton fabric attached to 2 poles and a light on the top so people can go and see the insects attracted to it. After this station, it's immediately woods with small barbed fences that you hop over to start your journey. Anyway, long story short, I get through the woods and found the creek after traversing down logs and walking through wetlands and bushes. And this is where things got weird. So after I get to the creek, I noticed a storm coming in overhead that I knew it was time to go back. I start my way back, and that was when I heard it. A voice. Very briefly, but I absolutely knew it was somebody talking. I couldn't make out what was said, but I froze and closed my eyes to focus on hearing, but heard nothing. No twig snapping, no voices, rustling, nothing. But I knew something wasn't right, and I quickly started making my way back to the point at where I had come in, which was easier said than done in the end. But on my way back, I heard something else, a giggle, and again I stopped, closed my eyes, and didn't hear anything again. I am now over this situation though and feeling completely uneasy. I focused on getting back to the insect station. I get back and hop the fence to the trail, and almost immediately, I just got goosebumps all over my entire body, uncontrollably as if I was freezing. I continued back to the house warily and luckily didn't hear or see anything, and went back inside and went to sleep. End of story. However, to add to this all, my colleague mentioned earlier when they went back there that they had heard twigs snapping with the weight of a human. They called out to whatever was out there, but they got no response and didn't hear anything else. They too are pretty experienced in the outdoors, but I thought that it could have been a deer, so I didn't give it much thought. But now, I don't know about that. I don't know what I experienced, and I don't know if I can say it's paranormal, but I would really appreciate if people could provide insights because I just don't know what to think of it. This started just like any other afternoon. I had just come home from the gym and I had just eaten when my friend called me and asked if I wanted to take a ride on my motorcycle. This is something that we do a lot, where we just sort of head out and drive around with good music and good vibes. And since it was really hot and a nice day, it couldn't fit any better really. So I grabbed my helmet, keys, and I headed to him. At first, we drove around a bit and just sort of vibed to some white girl music and lived life in the heat. As I was running low on fuel, we were about to head back when he suddenly pointed out a seemingly normal gravel path leading into the forest. As we had nothing better to do, we started to ascend the trail, which was pretty steep. It was so steep that my friend had to jump off for a bit while I drove up. When we reached more plain grounds, we decided that I should drive forward a bit, just to see if there was anything to see or if it was just a dead end or some random house or something. I started to drive ahead a bit and was first met by a wavy sort of gravelly path for a while, until there on the left side was an opening in the trees, revealing a trail which had quite fresh tire marks. I thought that was a bit odd, but thought nothing of it really, and I just continued forward. And suddenly, on the trail in front of me, maybe 10 feet away, I saw a man standing by a car. As the road curved, the sight was sort of blocked, so he couldn't see me, but I could see out of his shape and some details that he was there. He looked to be in his 30s, I would guess, and wore a black cap and grey zip-up. I, at this point, started to think that maybe we were on private property. However, there were no signs at all indicating that. I, however, decided to turn around in any case and head back to my friend, so that we could go before the man by the car would manage to drive out after unknowingly not knowing that we were there, and maybe spot us on the way out. I drove back to my friend, who was a little bit tired, having to walk up with his helmet on, and I told him about the guy that was further up the road. We were just sort of standing there, talking about following the trail into the woods on the left by foot, when we saw the headlights of a car approaching from where the car had been. At that point, we just sort of noped out of there, and he practically jumped onto my motorcycle, and we drove away. As we were heading back down the trail, the car approached us rapidly and was soon right on my tail. We both felt that it was time to go, and I pulled out onto the main road just to have the car copy our turn. I saw a smaller road that I had taken before that led to a bicycle path, which I took us down on. And as we looked back, we could see the car come to a complete stop on the road before slowly driving away. I know that this incident by itself may not be that disturbing, and it really isn't, I guess, and was just a bit of fun, I suppose. But the disturbing part of it is that we wanted to see the end of the road without having to go back again, so we looked it up on Google Earth, and what we found there is the really disturbing part. We found the road, but when we looked at the pictures, which must have been old because of the photos, there were like multiple houses on the side of the road and which looked to be in really good shape, with newly mowed grass and a caravan park next to it and all that. Obviously, that was now not the case. But the situation, however, was pretty odd as there was a lot of trash on the ground and what looked to be clothes spread around on the ground next to the gravel path. Something even weirder was that when I clicked along the path to see the end of the road, it was all blurred out and you couldn't see what was hidden behind it. I could show the pictures, I guess, from Google Earth right now, but since I didn't get any pictures of the road when we were there, I would really have no proof for anything. However, me and my friend did return this week and we tried to get some pictures of where the houses were on Google Earth and what lies at the end of the road. There was a bit of a hasty change in plans and me and my friend and another guy decided to head back to the place again today instead. I probably should have taken the advice of some people on being wary of returning, but something weird is definitely going on over there. It's almost like the forest and the path change and the road had different paths this time. The biggest problem is that there is a cabin there now too, and I just cannot wrap my head around that. When we were there last time, we stood right where it was today, and it's not new. It looks like it had been there for ages. It is well kept though, which is strange. A new roadblock had appeared, blocking the path to the final part of the trail as well. We took the car there this time, and we had to walk the last bit since we couldn't get past the barrier. And as we walked, I had a really weird, odd sort of deja vu feeling, and I could have sworn that I looked over my shoulder at least 10 times. At the end of the path, an anonymous-looking building surrounded by a giant fence was there. Next to the building was a camouflaged radar. It must have been connected to the building. Due to not wanting to reveal myself and to not get into trouble with a higher power, I refrained from photographing the building, but there was a Defense Department sign stating that doing so was highly illegal, and I didn't want to risk anything over a scary story. We noped out of there pretty fast though before returning to the roadblock, and we investigated the cabin that appeared out of seemingly nowhere. My friend went forward and looked in through the window as I had an eerie feeling about the whole thing. He looked for a second and then he took off running. I obviously followed suit and he just said to get into the car quickly. As we drove off, he explained that the inside looked fake and too fixed and that he also saw a cup of coffee sitting on a table. He said that something was really off about it and that it sort of looked staged, was his words. In any case, we took off in the car and we headed out onto the main road again. But I'm in awe right now and I don't know if I want to return or if I should stay away from there. We also investigated a bit around the house and found a couple of footprints from a boot and some other things. And like I said, I'm just torn right now. So, does anyone have an explanation for what this could be, or is it just something weird happening? If you have any theories as to what this all could be, then I would genuinely love to know. Also, this is going to sound a bit like a rant, and it very much is, but I'm sitting here now and don't know where to go with this, so I look close at Google Earth images and there's a whole house on its lawn has been wiped off of the radar. The house we found was one of 3, all in similarity to the one that we found. And everything just seems wrong about this place. I get a bit agitated and panicked when I look at the map because it's just so wrong and it just doesn't look right. Everything is different and I think I need to go back to find the other houses. And this time, I'm determined to get some pictures. This story is from my childhood. And look, I know that this is a strange one, but I'm just wondering if anyone has heard of anything like this before. So when I was 16, me and my friend, we went out to a park one day. It was a cold, snowy day, so we did what any rational teen would do and ventured under into a sewer pipe where it was nice and warm. We walked a ways into this pipe. It was quite notorious for my friend group. Did a little bit of graffiti in one of the grates where light shone through, then walked back to sit at the entrance together and talk. It was around this time that we heard a grating of metal against concrete. You would naturally assume at this point that It's a manhole being very, very slowly dragged across the street and opened for somebody else to come in. We heard this, mentioned it, and for the most part ignored it. The sounds, they continued though, like metal against concrete. Eventually, I catch something out of my peripheral. My friend is already focused on that direction too, and when I look, I first see the water in the pipe splashing. I'm curious because it's the dead of winter. I mean, why would they move it like that? Violently and up is what I mean. When I focus my eyes, that was when I see a hand and an arm bleached as white as paper, moving back and forth, splashing the water up and down. This was the water where we just were, where we graffitied, and now a being was there, supposedly, just out of nowhere, whiter than any human I'd ever seen, anorexic and hidden by a shadow. I ask if he sees, and he says yes. He sees a bleached white arm splashing the water where we were, and that was all it took for me to zip the heck out of there quickly. He followed in tow not soon after. Outside the pipe, he hesitates though and wonders if we should go back in because he hasn't seen something like that before and wonders what it was. I refuse though, and we eventually just continued with our day. Later in the week, I attempted to rationalize everything. Maybe all that hubbub about metal against concrete was the garbage man or a mailman, and our eyes were just playing tricks on us. My parents eventually informed me that they don't come out on Sundays though. They would not have been in the neighborhood. I tell this story to other friends in town, and they recount seeing a creature of the same make, bleached white, anorexic limbs with circumstances beyond anything normal, including flashes of light and screams in the forest nearby, etc. Sometimes I wonder, what did I see that day? Should we have gone back, and if we did, what would we have seen? If anyone has any intel or some sort of lore or anything, then I would love to hear it. Anything similar, I would genuinely love to know. Honestly though, I've sort of come to terms with the fact that I probably will just never know. I, a 41-year-old female, live in Montana, and a few years ago, I was forced to relocate after my landlord decided to rent to her son. The community that I had lived in for 11 and a half years has become incredibly expensive, $787,000 median home price. Unfortunately, I was forced to relocate to another city, and because of the unexpected move and associated costs, I moved in with a roommate. My roommate left eventually to pursue a better job prospect about 3 months after I'd moved in. Our unit was a triplex, so there were 2 gentlemen that inhabited the other units. I was never added to the lease as the property manager required a full deposit, and I was just not in a financially healthy spot at the time. I remained in the unit for 1.5 years on my own, paying the rent and the utilities. Eventually, I became very good friends with the man in the unit closest to mine. His name was Devon, 52 and male. Devon was a disabled veteran in recovery, and I also am a veteran, so he held a bit of a soft spot in my heart. We shared meals, hung out and discussed all of life's mysteries, and would look out for one another. Devon had gone to treatment for 6 weeks, and I had watched his cat while he was gone too. Our friendship developed over the course of 1.5 years. Devon had expressed romantic interest. However, right from the beginning, I clearly informed Devon that I didn't share those feelings and we would never be more than just good friends. Devon seemed to be lonely, which made sense. However, I'm a person who requires alone time to recharge my batteries. I set strict boundaries for Devon as he wanted to hang out all the time. I would catch him walking through the front yard multiple times a day to get the mail, which I believed was to see if I was outside so that he could stop to chat. When I would leave in the morning to go to work, Devon was always outside to tell me that I looked nice and to have a good day. I eventually told him that all made me feel a bit uncomfortable, and he should just send a text letting me know if he wanted to hang out sometime and wait for a response. There were a couple of times I yelled at him for sort of overstepping my boundaries. The first, I had just got home and pulled into my garage. I was on a phone call and had stayed in the car, and Devon looked through the garage window to see if I was home. I was annoyed, but didn't really think too much of it. The second, though, I was getting dressed in my room in the summer, so the window was cracked. I felt like this was safe, as the window was not in a place that anyone could be walking by, as it was on my patio at the back of the home. But I caught Devon peeking through, and I completely lost it. I let Devon know that under no uncertain terms, his behavior was inappropriate, and that if he didn't respect my boundaries, we would no longer be friends. Last year, while I was still in the home, I had asked Devon to watch my dog for a couple of days so I could go to a family event out of state. Devon was happy to help, and I was genuinely very appreciative. Not long after I returned, I started to notice strange things in my home though, but I really just thought that it was me. Like, for instance, I would be fairly certain that I had locked my door in the morning when I had left for work, but when I returned, it would be unlocked. I would be sure that I had shut off all the lights, but when I got home in the evening, one would be on. I really just thought that it was absent-mindedness, but fast forward a couple of months and my mum became sick with cancer. My sister watched my dog while I went to tend to my mum. My sister reached out to me and she asked if anyone else had a key to my apartment. I let her know that she had the only spare key, but asked why, obviously. Similarly, she had experienced the same issues with lights and locks. I had not shared my concerns with my sister prior to her communicating hers with me, as I really just doubted my own sanity. While I was out of town, I received a text message from Devon asking if I had a potato that he could borrow. I let him know that I was out of state with my mum, who was sick. Devon didn't reply, which was sort of out of character, but I had noticed a change in Devon's effect. He was more reserved than ever and less friendly towards me. I thought it probably had to do with my firm adherence to my boundaries, which was fine by me. I mean, he didn't have to like them, but he had to respect them. But when I got back to town, one night I stayed over at my sister's house after helping her move. As mentioned above, I was struggling financially, so I would carefully budget and plan my weekly meals. The morning before my sister's move, I had placed 3 pieces of bacon into a Ziploc bag to be used later for a BLT. When I returned the following morning, much to my disbelief, there were only 2 pieces of bacon. I held the bag in my hands knowing that there had been 3, and it was at this point that I no longer doubted myself. I called my sister and let her know that someone had been getting into my house. I always keep the place locked, and the only logical thing that could have happened is Devon made a copy of my key when he had watched my dog in the fall. My sister reminded me about the potato text, and the potato in the counter basket was now gone. I had enough information to be pretty certain that my neighbor had violated my trust and was no friend at all. However, I still wasn't afraid of him, I guess. As I mentioned, he's a disabled vet and was somewhat feeble and sort of sickly. I wasn't scared of a confrontation, but I immediately went to the hardware store and purchased a camera that streams to your phone once the motion detector has been activated. I placed it facing the side door where Devon would enter. It also had 2-way audio capability, so my plan was that when Devon decided to enter my home again, I would see it and say over the camera something to the effect of "Get out of my house, put the key you copied on the counter, and never try to speak with me again or I'll contact law enforcement." As I said, I was not on the lease and didn't want to be homeless, so I couldn't turn to the property manager for help, and Devon knew that too. Now, in the evenings, I started placing a jug of cat litter and a kitchen chair in front of the door that I knew Devon was accessing the apartment from, but I never expected that he would attempt to come in while I was at home, and really, he had only taken a piece of uncooked bacon and a potato at this point. Laying on the couch one night, watching TV, I thought that I had heard something sliding on the floor in the laundry room where the door was, but I knew that there was no way that he would come in while I was home. My cat was running around playing, so I decided that it was probably just her and I was being paranoid because of all that had happened. The next morning, while changing my laundry, I noticed that the litter and chair had been pushed 3 to 4 inches. I checked the sensitivity of the camera and I found that I was able to replicate by slowly opening the door like that, which means that Devon had tried to come into my home while I was there. But why? That morning, I took bear spray into the shower with me while my knees knocked. Genuinely, I was terrified. I felt vulnerable and violated. Devon knew that I knew now also, and he knew that I had placed a barrier in front of that door. After that morning, he was never outside in the morning again, nor did he walk through the yard to get his mail. I obtained a firearm for protection, and I did make a police report. The police officer was annoyed with me as I did not want him to approach Devon, as all Devon would need to do is report me to the property manager and I would be homeless. I'm grateful that whatever he was up to was apparently thwarted that night, but the fact that he tried to come in while he knew that I was home, it genuinely gives me the heebie-jeebies. I do wonder if he went through my underwear, watched me while I slept at any point. Since my situation has greatly improved now, I ended up moving out shortly after to take care of my mum. I got my own place again a few months ago, and I will never put my trust in another neighbor for pet house sitting ever again. It still blows my mind that I had some guy stealing from me and likely stalking me too. I guess this story just solidifies that one should always trust their gut. There were so many times that a red flag was screaming at me and I just thought that I was being crazy, and stupidly, I ignored it. Today I was listening to some scary stories, and it made me remember this event. At the time of this story, I was 14, and as well as being younger, I had developed crippling anxiety and depression. All I'll say is that I was, and still am, very vigilant about my surroundings. Now on this day, I had planned to stay the night at a friend's house. I had never stayed at her place before. It was always mine. For you to understand this story, I do need to explain the layout of this house. It was located on a sloped hill, and when you drove down a steep road, the first part of the house you would see was big and expansive. Honestly, it looked a bit like an old mansion. If you continue driving down, you would be met with 2 semi-separated buildings. Both were small and pretty run down. And when I say small, I mean one of them was just a bedroom and the other one was a bedroom and a small bathroom and kitchen. There were no doors inside, just a piece of cloth or beads to separate the bathroom entrance from the kitchen. My friend's room was the bedroom, and her mum lived in the other section with the bathroom or kitchen. The landlord of the property lived in the main house, the big mansion. It was located in the middle of the woods, and when I say that, I don't mean it lightly. I mean, all you could see was expansive Australian forest. Australian rainforests are incredibly dense too, and if you tried to walk through, you would most likely receive some type of bite at some point, whether that be a spider, an ant, a leech, etc. So, I'll cut to the first thing that happened. Me and my friend, we had walked into her mum's flat. I forget why, but I think we were either hungry or I was asking how to get reception, because there was none at the time, and called out for her mum. She was in the bathroom, and as we walked past a small window, I heard, "Yeah?" coming from outside. I turned to my friend, and she looked at me the same way that I did. We were really confused. If her mum was in the bathroom, that was right in front of us. Why did we hear a male voice coming from right outside? We brushed this off so as not to scare ourselves and continued having fun in my friend's room. For a little more context, The landlord used half of her room as storage and blocked off the back section of the room with a tall shelf and a divider. There was a huge glass sliding door at the front of her room too, and in the blocked off back section there was another door. You couldn't get to that door unless you squeezed through a section outside. Now, skipping forward a little bit to nighttime, me and my friend had to go to the bathroom, so we slinked out of her room and walked to her mum's flat. Her mum was fast asleep now. We used the bathroom as quietly as we could, and then we exited. As we were making the small walk back to my friend's room, we saw something out in the woods. A pair of eyes, looking directly at us from behind a tree. We panicked and froze. I pulled out my phone and took a photo before we sprinted back into her room, locking the glass door behind us and drawing the curtains. It's not a reach to say that we were already freaking out. We looked at the photo and, sure enough, when I brightened the image, there was what looked to be a man staring at us from the dark woods. Obviously, we were extremely scared, but I called my mother, who was about an hour away, and she just sort of dismissed us. And so after that, we were obviously scared, but it was a little comforting. Anyway, after a while we relaxed and chalked it up to our imagination playing tricks on us. We pulled out my laptop and put on a movie. I forget which movie we watched, but it was some cheesy rom-com, I think. And maybe 20 or 30 minutes into the movie, we froze and paused it. There were footsteps crunching on the dry leaves right outside of her room. We listened in horror as the footsteps moved through the tight alley that led to the back door. We both moved slowly, standing on the bed to look over the room divider. Our eyes were locked on the back door, and after a moment of complete silence, it turned. The doorknob wiggled slowly before it became faster. The door couldn't be opened as it was jammed against objects that were in storage, and then it stopped. No more noise. We were crying, holding each other in our arms, trying to stay as quiet as we could. Then the footsteps slowly crunched on the leaves in the opposite direction, back to the front of her room. We both didn't hesitate now, and I reached for my phone. We called the police, and after trying to explain the situation to the operator on the other end, in tears the whole time, she told us a unit was being dispatched and to stay where we were. But then, as we were still crying and hyperventilating, we heard a phone ringing. It sounded like an old landline phone, one with harsh and loud beeping. It was coming from the landlord's mansion. We waited silently, listening to the drawn-out ringing of his phone. After what felt like at least 2 minutes, it stopped, and we heard his voice as he talked to the operator. At this time, we both noticed another thing: fingerprints on her window. These windows were slated glass that you could open and shut with a lever. Whoever left these prints, they reached up, cupped their hand around the top of the glass, and dragged their fingers on the dust, because it definitely wasn't there before. Soon, the landlord walked to her mother's unit and had told her that the police called him. He seemed extremely upset and told her that he made sure that they didn't send a unit. Her mother came to her room and we explained the situation. Both the landlord and her mother didn't seem to be bothered by the fact that a man just tried to enter our room. After that, I couldn't stay the night, and neither could my friend. We were too scared to spend another minute there, so I called my mum and she came to get us at around 11 p.m. to 12 p.m. We dropped my friend back the next day, and when we got there, her mother told us something that I don't think that I can pass up as coincidence. You see, the night that it happened, it was raining, and there was a pretty strong wind, but nothing strong enough to do this. Next to her mother's unit, she had a pole that held beads and fairy lights and all that. During the night, right after me and her were picked up, it had been knocked down. Keep in mind, this pole was literally embedded into the cement and tied to other items with zip ties as well. So like I said, there was no way that could have been the wind. I mean, that pole was pretty darn sturdy. I am still unsure of an explanation to all of this. I mean, it may have been her landlord, right? I'm not too sure about that. It also could have been just a random man. Either way, I'm absolutely certain that there was somebody out there that night. I'm a 25-year-old person renting a 4-bedroom house. One of my roommates is my boyfriend, and the other is my best friend of 10 years. Her name is Tracy. We've been looking for a new roommate, and because of the way that this situation turned out, we have determined that I'm no longer allowed to be in charge of looking for roommates, because I am not judgmental enough and I am known to just ignore red flags. I'll start from the beginning though, which is the house showing. So, our new prospective roommate showed up for the house showing and introduced himself. He definitely seemed strange at first, but I wrote it off as him just sort of being eccentric. The main red flag was that, at some point, he randomly said something to the effect of, "And I will not bring meth into your house because I'm not on meth. I hate drugs and I see them as a scourge on this entire country." I didn't ask, so I was immediately weirded out, but my boyfriend and the roommate who was moving out also met the guy, and they both thought that apart from that, he seemed pretty normal. He didn't look like a stereotypical meth head by any means. His skin was clear, and he was kind of chubby. We thought that maybe he thought I was a meth head, because I look a little bit scary. I have green hair, a 1G septum, and 6 facial piercings. In addition, my roommate, who was moving out, turned out to be hiding a cat, which made the house stink like cat wee, which I've been told is what meth smells like. Also, the town that this guy was coming from is known for meth and crack, and he seemed to be explicitly trying to get away from that town. So I thought that maybe he was afraid of ending up in a situation where he was living with drug addicts and was trying to suss us out that way. And so, giving him the benefit of the doubt was my first mistake. Me and Tracy, we were both sort of wigged out about the entire thing, but we were kind of desperate for a roommate, and all of the other people responding to my listing either were not great fits or were even sketchier than this guy. So in the end, we let him move in. Now, skip to the move-in date. He brings an old man to help move his stuff. He then proceeds to make the old man move all of his things by himself up the stairs while he sits there, including a refrigerator, by himself. The new guy signs the lease, and immediately after signing the lease, he informs us that he did not introduce himself using his real name, and proceeds to tell us his real name. This man was not transgender, so the only reason that I can think of as for why he initially gave us a fake name is probably so that he could avoid having us run a background check. After this, I had to go to work though. Throughout my shift though, Tracy sends me a message that the guy is weird, but her responses are sort of vague and I didn't find out what happened until I got home. But here's what she told me. So the new guy, he goes to the bar after signing the lease and comes back after being kicked out before 9 p.m. The bar that he went to is a biker bar that is notorious for being pretty rowdy. Honestly, it's pretty hard to get kicked out of there too. I mean, you pretty much have to be doing something pretty heinous, or you have to have been like creeping on a woman there in order to get kicked out. In any case, when he comes back, he is completely drunk, but the men there must have been intimidated by me, is what he said. Sounds to me more like he was creeping. Before this, I had told the new guy that our landlord is coming up the next day to fix some things in the house. But when the new guy came home, Tracy reminded him that our landlord was coming the next day, and he became extremely angry, to the point that he was flailing his arms and she thought that he was going to start breaking things. Tracy was so uncomfortable that she almost went to go and wake up my boyfriend in the other room. Eventually, the new guy did calm down, however, and so she just left it at that. Now, there's this beanbag that we have next to my couch, and Tracy was sitting on the beanbag with her legs sort of slung over the armrest of the couch. At first, the new guy sat on the couch. He begins to read off poetry that he wrote for her an entire hour and a half before, all of which is literally just streams of consciousness about how he wants all junkies to die. Afterwards, he starts telling her how beautiful she is over and over, and literally lays his head down between her legs. She's trying to ignore him and obviously trying to get him off her, and he won't stop asking her if she fell asleep. Every time she moves, he gets a little bit closer. Then he starts inviting her to his room for a beer. Eventually, she just gets up and goes to her room at 11 p.m. But this man, he had effectively harassed her for like 2 entire hours. I thought that was everything, but then she tells me that she sent the guy's picture to her mum, who then sent his picture to everyone she knows, because she's from the town that he was previously living in. And it turned out that he had been stalking Tracy's aunt for an entire year, and that he's banned from the bar that she works at because he goes there and threatens to kidnap her. She literally has to be escorted out, not only by workers, but the customers escort her to her car sometimes. So, obviously we tell our landlord. Luckily our lease hadn't been finalized yet, so he agreed to kick him out. I call my mum to come over and Tracy calls her brother for backup, just in case things go south. Our landlord shows up and essentially tells him that he needs to leave and doesn't let the new guy get a word in. The new guy starts getting agitated though, and then aggressive, so we called the cops and several officers showed up, told the guy that he had no legal standing as there was no lease. He introduced himself to us with a fake name, obviously, and he hadn't been there for a full 24 hours and that he had to get out. The guy had to beg his sister to pick him up, and she was so unwilling to do it that she didn't agree until he offered to pay her $200. Mind you, it's only a 20-minute ride to where he was going. He left most of his stuff on our porch. When we went into his room, it smelled like cigarette smoke and there was an empty pack on the floor, including not 1 or 2, but 7 empty Dr. Pepper cans and garbage and crusty socks everywhere. The entire situation had me so stressed out that I didn't even notice that he had also left a pair of shorts that he had peed in the middle of the house's main hallway, and that was also the first thing you see when you walk into the house. They were there for the entire day, allegedly, even when he knew that the landlord was coming. They were still sitting there when he left as well, and I picked them up with a glove and put them on the porch for him to retrieve at some point. But who knows if or when he will retrieve his things, because he came back earlier, touched his things like he was going to take them, and then just immediately left. All I have to say after all of this is that I'm really relieved that we caught this before the lease was finalized, because this easily could have turned into a situation where me and Tracy had been sexually assaulted, or perhaps even worse. I've only told a few people about this incident that took place in the late 80s. I'm not looking for an explanation, nor can I offer any proof. I just want to share what my friend and I experienced in the autumn of 1987. So I grew up in one of the northernmost states in New England, about 2 hours away from the White Mountains and 45 minutes from our state's meager coastline, in a small working-class city. General Electric and a tannery were 2 of the largest employers. I think it was early October. The leaves started to change, but still on the trees, local fairs underway, and cool enough to rock my HS varsity jacket. I worked full-time and was saving up for my first car, a 76 two-door Chevy Nova festooned with a Pink Floyd tapestry to cover the huge tear in the back seat. My friend, Joe, and I worked in the same restaurant, and an older cook would buy us hard-earned libations and give us a ride home. Really, he would just drop us off at a cemetery that was midway point between our 2 houses, and a great place for underage drinking. We were dropped off there with a 4-pack of Bartles and James wine coolers to split between us. It's an old large cemetery with rolling hills, moss-covered headstones, and large maple trees too. I grew up playing hide-and-seek and having BB gun wars there, in fact. I even taught an army buddy how to drive stick in that cemetery. It was never a scary or haunted place to me at all. Even after the weirdest experience of my young life took place there, I still thought of it fondly. Now, there was a gazebo where we would sit and drink beers, wine coolers. It was open-aired, with half walls and benches to sit on while we chatted and drank. All we had between us was that 1 4-pack, so we were not drunk or under the influence of anything else. But we began hearing footsteps coming in our direction. They sounded like somebody was walking on leaves. It later occurred to me that that was the first thing that was odd, as the leaves were still on the trees and the cemetery was pretty well maintained. "Cops," Joe hissed, and I answered, "Kids." The footsteps, they came closer. We couched below the half-wall facing each other, the smiles on our faces growing more and more nervous until they disappeared altogether. The footsteps came at a measured pace. No other sound accompanied them, no jingling of keys, no fabric brushing against each other, and there was also no beam of a flashlight flitting about. The footsteps kept coming though. I could see my mounting fear echoed in Joe's face, but before we crouched down, we tried to see who was walking toward us, and we really couldn't. But that was to be expected, to be honest. It was a moonless night with little ambient light available. With our eyes wide and mouths agape, the footsteps came all the way up to the other side of that half wall and stopped. Joe visibly sagged, and I began to shake as neither one of us had the courage to look up at what had to be surely someone peering down at us. The footsteps, they then began to recede, and we popped up immediately to see who it was. And when we did, there was nobody there. Literally nobody. I mean, we could hear or sort of see where the footsteps were coming from, but there just wasn't anybody making them. It was dark, but it wasn't pitch black, and we surely would have seen someone there. We definitely would have at least seen the silhouette of a person out there. Ducking behind tombstones, we followed the steps a little ways down the hill until they stopped. And at that, we took that as our cue to leave, and we both sprinted home. The next day at school, we allowed that it was weird, and, well, that was that. We didn't tell anyone, and we just sort of went on with our lives. Like I said, we weren't drunk or stoned. Neither of us have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and being outside like that, I seriously doubt it was a carbon monoxide problem. Really, I just have no explanation for this, and I don't expect anyone else to either. The 80s were a magical time, and I guess some days they just contained a little more magic than others. When I was in primary school, we used to go on school trips to a place called Marchant's Hill in Surrey, UK. Marchant's Hill is an adventure centre that mainly caters to schools. They have activities like climbing, orienteering, canoeing, etc., and they had dorms to stay in as well. We usually went for like 4 or 5 days. The place sits on 45 acres of land, and there's really no reason to be there other than the above. I believe they also have a part for adults for team building trips and stuff like that, but they're certainly not together, so we'd only ever see employees or sometimes kids from a different school while there. Now, one evening, we were camping out for the night. A Marchant's Hill employee led us to the camping area at about 7 p.m, helped show us all how to set up our tents, and start a fire, and then left for the night, leaving us in the care of 2 of our teachers from school. We had a fire going, and we're all sitting around it on logs that were placed around the fire area. We were singing songs and talking and just being kids as it got darker. After a while, a couple of us heard the sound of somebody approaching, but I didn't think too much of it. Probably just an employee checking in. Suddenly, though, this guy appears out of the darkness and loudly says, "You shouldn't be here." Everyone whips their head around to see who it was, and this guy was just sort of standing there. He's a big guy, looked homeless in that he had a big scraggly beard and hair, but he's wearing a suit with Wellington boots and is holding a plastic bag. One of our teachers says to the guy, "It's okay, we're booked in for a few days. We're from this school." The guy looks around for a few seconds, like he's checking behind himself, and then repeats, "You shouldn't be here," but louder. The male teacher that was with us jumps up and positions himself between the guy and us kids very quickly, and repeats that we are supposed to be here, and asks the man who he is, while at the same time grabbing him by the arm to sort of lead him away. The strange guy pulls his arm away aggressively, then walks off real quickly without saying another word though. A bit later, all of the kids are in their tents, 2 to a tent. The teachers are still sat outside, probably enjoying some child free time, when we hear some shouting, and it sounded to me like, "Go, go, get out." A few of us opened our tents, and I could just about see the same guy standing there in the darkness. Our teacher is already right by the guy at that point, and shouts at him to leave, but the guy is just sort of looking at him, so the teacher starts to gently push him back away from us, and is saying something to the guy while doing so. They disappear into the darkness of the surrounding area for maybe 30 seconds. Then my teacher comes back and, with a look of urgency, says, "We're going back to the dorms right now." No idea what was said, but my teacher's whole demeanor had changed suddenly. We all leave our tents pitched, and we walk the 10 minutes or so back to the dorms by torchlight. Once we're in the dorm, the teachers go off to speak to an employee, and about 15 minutes later, we see a police car pull up by the reception area, and the police talk to my teacher. That guy had absolutely no reason to be on that 45 acres of land. Looking back, he probably had mental health issues, but man did he scare us. And thinking back on it all, it still makes me feel a little bit uneasy. This happened a few years ago, so some details may not be the clearest in my head, but I'll try to recall this event in its fullest form. So first, let me set up the layout of where it happened. My upstairs hallway has 5 rooms connected to it. In order from the stairs, it goes my sister's room, the bathroom, the office, master bedroom, and then my room at the very end. The stairs lead down to the kitchen and share a wall with a bathroom, so you can hear anyone on the stairs quite easily. In addition to this, it's not a new house, so you can hear pretty much everything because thin walls, loud floors, and doors and all that. Now, what happened one night was that I had woken up at around midnight or 1 a.m. because I needed to go to the bathroom at some point. With the standard amount of grumbling because I didn't want to leave the warmth of my bed, I got up and walked down the hallway to the bathroom. Everything was perfectly normal until I went to go and wash my hands. A sound on the stairs made me pause because it didn't sound like one of the cats. They're fat and old and have a very distinct way of going up and down the stairs. I listened though as quick, light footsteps ran up the stairs and around the corner to come down the hallway. They ran up and down the hallway twice before stopping in front of the bathroom door, which I couldn't have been more than 3 feet away from. They breathed loudly, in and out a few times. Then they ran back down the hall and down the steps into the kitchen where they stopped making noise. I would have been able to hear them if they continued. I was rightly freaked out because the sounds that I had heard were very clearly made from a little kid, of which there were none in my house. The footsteps were too close together, light, and way too quick to be anyone in the house messing with me. In order to move that fast, anyone who lived there would have had to have made at least twice as much noise, and the only one capable of running as fast as what I'd heard would have been my sister. But again, she couldn't have done it that quietly. I ended up waiting for about 2 hours in that bathroom before finally coming back out and booking it to my room. Any perpetrators would have been hurt if they had tried to return to their room or if they were anywhere awake because our house is very quiet at night. But I heard nothing after that night. No footsteps, no breathing, no activity. The next morning too, I asked each of my family members individually and separately, so they couldn't talk to each other between my interrogations, if they had gotten up at all last night, or if they had heard anything last night too. None of them are good liars, and I know when they're telling the truth, so when they all said that they slept through the night, genuinely, I believe them. So we moved into this house 5.5 years ago. I'd never experienced anything paranormal before. Honestly, I was a hardcore skeptic. It was around 18 months later that I began to experience disturbing paranormal events I cannot explain, no matter how much science I read. Note 2, I do not have a history of hallucinations or schizophrenia or anything. I wasn't smoking weed at the time, nor on any other drugs. I was also in my mid-20s at the time. The first incident was on a November night at about 10:50 p.m. Almost all events happened between 10:51 to 2 a.m., but primarily between 11 to 1. For some context, I'd spent the last hour playing Among Us and studying from a Spanish textbook. I would listen to relaxing jazz sometimes and drink some Jack Daniels. I wasn't drunk by any means, but I went to pee. My mind was focused on how clever, funny the games were and how I couldn't wait to get back to what I was doing. And when I pulled my trousers up, a noise caught my attention. It was an Alberta Balsam shampoo bottle, about 1/3 or just under full, between the taps on the sink. It is a standard British porcelain sink close to the toilet, but to touch the bottle, I would need to extend my arm, bending my elbow, and that night there was no one nowhere near close enough for contact. But the bottle, it rocked far to the left, to the right, unnaturally, and repeated this motion about 5 times before it came to a standstill in its original position. It wasn't a small wobble by any means, too. It was a slow, intentional rock side to side. The bottle should not have been able to rock so far for either side either without falling over. But my bathroom is tiny. I couldn't touch the bottle, let alone cause it to rock the way that it did. The window was closed, so there was no breeze and anybody else in the room. I tried to replicate it another time by blowing hard on the bottle, flapping my arms and holding myself in the same position as when it happened, but I couldn't touch or move the bottle at all. Even with the generous leeway, I couldn't touch that bottle, and in short, it wasn't me, and genuinely, it ruined my night because this incident absolutely terrified me. A couple of days later, I was in the same bathroom, washing my hands at about the same time at night, when I experienced a sudden and intense sensation that something sinister was behind me and staring at me. I looked up at the mirror and couldn't see anything behind me, but I just felt like something was there. I was too afraid to move. I finished washing my hands after a minute or so, and when the feeling began to fade, I quickly left the bathroom. But this became a regular occurrence. Particularly in the kitchen and the bathroom, I felt something there, or that something was watching me, and sort of attempting to interact with me too. The presence was somewhat imposing and dark. I could never see it, but I just felt like it was there. My partner didn't believe me when I told him about these incidents, and would go to bed before me, so he never witnessed them at first. I believe this presence was a man, and for a while thought that it might have been the deceased elderly man who used to live here. He was placed in a care home aged 95, and was known as a nasty, horrible old man. The man passed away at some point. I'm not sure when, but it was either during the incidents or towards the end of them. Additionally, we had a living room carpet, and as these incidents increased in frequency, I began to hear something plucking at the carpet in the corner by the door. When I moved the curtain, there was nothing ever there, and the noise always stopped. But this is where my partner comes in, because he stayed up later occasionally, and he heard the noise too. Mind you, I didn't prompt him. I heard it and remained quiet until he picked up on it, and I told him that that was the noise that I was hearing. He went to investigate, and he couldn't see anything, and this is what made him suspicious too. Now, we have a rabbit, but we checked on him. He was in his cage eating in the next room while the noises happened, and unless he could teleport, pluck the carpet before our eyes while invisible, and teleport back into his cage, then it definitely wasn't him. Since then, I lifted the floor to see if anything could have plucked the carpet from beneath the floorboards. but the floorboards are locked tight, and honestly it would have been impossible to touch the underside of the carpet or underlay or whatever. This may be my mind manifesting fear too, but I also began to have horrible dreams about an old man with beady, shiny black eyes, a partially bald head, and white hair in a forest. I recognized the layout from a forest far away in my hometown that I used to ride a horse in. These dreams were disturbing to say the least, and the men were not like ordinary people. I felt they were trying to toy with me before they killed me. And one night, I woke up to feel someone standing over me. Another, I woke up and briefly glimpsed black writing all over the wall on the landing, and when I blinked, it vanished. I was honestly terrified and often felt something on the landing or in the room too. I had no history of sleep paralysis before moving to this house. My partner told me that he believed that whatever it was enjoyed scaring me and was feeding on my fear. I tried after this to not to be afraid and to confront it, which honestly worked to some degree in the end. But one of the worst incidents was when I knew the man was there. I felt him standing about 2 feet away from my computer chair. He liked to stand over me and sometimes breathe on me while I was gaming. I was playing World of Warcraft. I remember exactly what I was doing. I knew that he was trying to get my attention, and so I ignored him. I forced myself to calm down. Then he moved closer, and I heard a huff as though someone breathed heavily through their mouth, only inches from my ear. I took my headset off and looked around, but the presence had disappeared, probably into the kitchen. I felt like he wanted me to follow him, so I did. My attention was guided out of the window as though he was leading me there. I went to the window and looked out, and I swear to you that I saw a shape out there that looked like an adult male of about 6 feet wearing a grey hoodie and gloves standing near my back fence as though he had just climbed over. Could I have been mistaken? Yes, for sure, but I tried to run from the window and ended up in a freeze mode by the kitchen door, because for some reason, I just couldn't move. I tried so hard to get away because I thought this man was going to break into my house and attack me or something. I don't know where the man was, but after about 2 minutes, I finally made it into the living room. 2 more and I went back to check. The man and the real man were both gone. A strange part of me believed, though, that the man chased the real figure off. In fact, I felt as though he had tried to save me that night, and I guess I became more sympathetic to him. There was another incident, though, which could be explained otherwise, but my partner wasn't convinced. We had a small children's desk with 2 wooden chairs behind us. We stacked the chairs on the table while our daughter was upstairs. While we were on the computers, the chairs just suddenly came crashing to the floor. Mind you, they were not precariously stacked or anything. The doors were open and there was a bit of a breeze, but there's just no way the wind would have been able to knock over the small wooden chairs to the floor like that. This also happened in broad daylight, in the late afternoon. Now, over time, this all began to fade. I feared the man less. I often felt his presence in the kitchen, standing far too close to me. One time, I even felt a sudden icy blow down the left side of my neck. Our house is cold and drafty, so although I convinced myself that it was him, it could have been something else, I admit. My nightmares, though, they began to disappear. I would hear him sometimes walking upstairs, and I sensed him go into my daughter's bedroom just to look at her. He never did anything in there, but my partner also experienced something going on in the house on several occasions, but he is still somewhat of a skeptic. Eventually, though, everything just stopped one day. But after the man disappeared, we had issues with, like, animal footsteps on the stairs, a scurrying. It was weird and creepy. It sort of sounded like a cat running up and down, I guess. The first time it happened, we couldn't see anything. The plucking noise continued, and it was around this time our house rabbit for some reason jumped out of his cage, and we had at least 2 to 3 incidences where he bolted up the stairs and went into our bedroom. He was running about, and this was really abnormal for him. Of course, we blamed him and locked his cage tightly so he couldn't escape, but the noise continued. My ex was also woken by the noise one night and investigated them, only to find the rabbit in his cage and the noises continuing. The noises and the incidences have stopped for quite some time now, thankfully. The house now feels at peace, but honestly, that was a deeply terrifying event that actually ruined my life and made me feel really unsafe in my own home at night. I'm still not completely sure what it was all about or what it all was, but that's why I'm here. What do you think that it could have been? This is the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me. So a couple of years back, I matched with a girl on Tinder from the same city. She offered that I could come over and watch a movie at her place. Everything was going pretty well, until she put on the movie. It was weird. It was like I couldn't focus on the movie because it was in black and white. Who would put on a movie in black and white, right? But anyway, all I could do was think about how I was going to get her upstairs to her room so that we could hook up. I'm a terrible person, I know, but in any case, we were sitting on what I call an L couch in her living room, where we were watching this movie. The edge of the couch where I was sitting was in the corner of the room. Hard to explain, but basically where I was sitting was the corner of the room with only walls behind me. I was being quite patient and didn't push her too much, but there came a point where I had had enough and was about to ask her if we can go upstairs. But before I could even move my lips, someone or something yelled in my ear to get out. Genuinely, it sounded like a male and extremely sort of demonic. Before anyone questions my sanity too, or if I was under the influence or anything, both are out of the question. I've never had this happen to me, and I could feel the vibration on my eardrum from the voice, as if somebody had cupped their hands and yelled in your ear. Anyway, naturally when this happened, I got up and questioned everything. Did you hear that? Is there anyone else in the house? She claimed that she didn't hear anything and sort of smiled at me and played it off that I was just nervous. I was starting to get uncomfortable and I could feel the energy of the room shifting, and I was genuinely ready to leave without hooking up or anything until she asked me if I wanted to go upstairs. I was obviously still stunned and confused, and asked her straight up if she has ever encountered anything paranormal in this house. She said no, but then continued to tell me a really horrible story about how one of her cousins was murdered, chopped up, and pieces of her were sent to the family, or her house being one of them. And I mean, it's kind of wild, right? But still, that wouldn't explain the male voice that I heard because her cousin was allegedly a young female. Still a little scared and confused, I should have left, but she was pretty and now inviting me to go upstairs to her room. But this is where things get just really scary for me because I know myself and would never do this, but anyways, when we got to her room, she invited me to take a shower with her. At this point, I knew that we were going to hook up and was eager to get it over with and leave. Normally, I would have joined her in the shower, but for some reason I was still on edge and checking over my shoulder every second like a weirdo. I told her that I would wait on her bed for her. Now, I remember sitting on her bed and just sort of looking around the room, but the next thing that I know is that it's morning, which means that apparently I passed out on the bed before she even got back into the room. Obviously, that is very odd. I was waiting to hook up and leave, no intentions of sleeping over at all, and no drugs or alcohol involved whatsoever. I couldn't remember how I fell asleep, which to me is just incredible. When I woke up in the morning, she also acted like nothing had happened. She said that I was sleeping like a baby and she didn't want to wake me up. I don't know. I feel like whatever was there that night was protecting her, or didn't want me to have sex with her. It was so weird, and I would like to hear anyone's thoughts on what this could have been. This is the only time that something like this has ever happened to me, and like I said, I get it. It's a weird one. This happened in India in the mid-90s. I was staying in an average mid-budget hotel in Goa, India. I went out for the night, bumped into a couple of lads from Birmingham earlier in the night, and went back to my hotel about midnight. Now, next to my hotel was a small lean-to type food shack, for want of a better description. I called in for a last drink before bed, and I was surprised to see the two Birmingham chaps from earlier. "What brought you here?" I asked. The taxi driver recommended it to us," they said. Anyway, there was only the three of us in there, and suddenly I was aware of another person on a table sat by himself who I hadn't seen come in. I introduced myself and asked him what his name was. "They call me the doctor," he replied. "Oh man, we've got some dodgy fantasist," I thought. "Go on then, indulge me. Why do they call you the doctor?" I asked. "Because I sort people out from bad trips," is what he said. Me being puzzled and looking around, couldn't see any beneficiary of his so-called special skills, so I asked him who he was sorting. He gestured at the waiter, a Jamaican man who had served us, and seemed pretty normal and healthy to me, really. So I thought that he was just some Walter Mitty sort of type character. But it didn't matter to me, as I was off to bed in a minute anyway. He then rolls a joint in front of me and invites me and the two Birmingham guys to take some. I think I've only tried once or twice in my life, so I decline. He's pretty persistent though, so I think, what the heck, what harm can 2 or 3 draws do to me anyway? I take about 3 draws, along with the two Birmingham lads who by this time are all sitting at the same table. And within about 60 seconds, my brain has gone to complete mush, and my eyes are spinning like saucers. My last abiding memory in the restaurant is this guy looking into my eyes, wagging his index finger at me and saying, "That's why they call me the doctor." My mind is absolutely gone. I don't know if I'm or the other 2 guys are being set up to be robbed or worse, and I realize that I've only got seconds to act. "I just gotta go for a pee," I managed to utter out before staggering out of the place, my legs like Bambi on ice and stumbling into my hotel just yards away. That night, I lay awake from midnight until 6 a.m., completely hallucinating. I've never taken anything before like acid or whatever, but that's what I imagined that it would be like. I never did meet the two Birmingham guys again, so I really don't know what transpired after I left. I do sometimes think about them, and I really do hope that they made it out okay. This took place about 5 years ago in the house that I'm currently living in. My friend and I, we were waiting in my living room for my dad because he was our ride to another friend's place. We were both 15 at the time, so we didn't have our licenses yet. He eventually poked his head around the corner to let us know that he was ready. We both got up and walked around the corner to then enter my kitchen, which leads to my back door. And as we entered the kitchen and turned towards the back, we both saw the side of my dad going around the corner to my back door. To the back left side of my kitchen from where we were standing, there is an entryway with 3 short steps that goes down to a small landing area where you can access the basement or the door to my backyard. We followed right behind him, but as we turned the corner, he just was not there. The back door was still shut and locked, which meant that the only way that he could have gone was the basement. I thought that this was very strange because he would have had to have sprinted down those steps in order to get out of our sight in that short of time frame, but neither of us heard any commotion. At this point, I was weirded out but figured that he was just pulling some sort of a joke on us. I began calling down the steps to him for a good 15 seconds with no response. At this point, my friend and I were starting to get slightly annoyed because our buddy had been waiting on us for a good amount of time. I turned to look at my friend with a confused expression, when all of a sudden, we heard my dad begin to whistle from the living room where we had just come from. We both sprinted up the short landing, through my kitchen, and into the living room where we found my dad. I instantly started freaking out, asking him how he was able to get from the back landing area back to our living room so quickly. And he explained that he never entered the kitchen after calling us, but instead turned the other way to my mum's office to let her know that we were leaving. But my friend and I both clearly saw my dad, and to this day, it is still one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me. The apparition, it was crystal clear, not foggy or transparent like the way Hollywood makes ghosts look, and was an exact replica of my dad. I want to take you back to 2009. Our family, we had been looking for a new house for a while now, and near a busy highway stood this beautiful house. 2 stories, big front and backyard, 3 spacious bedrooms, and so on. Some strange stuff did occur relatively early on, like computers booting on by itself or water starting to run by itself. But the real horror began when my older sister decided to make a Ouija board, essentially draw one herself on a piece of paper, and use a glass to communicate. My younger sister got scared when she found out what was happening and kicked the Ouija paperboard away. And well, soon after, everything got a lot worse. My sisters shared the biggest bedroom. At the end of their room was a sort of very little closet room where they placed boxes and such. The door was always closed, but it refused to stay closed after that. And I mean, no matter what, it kept opening. My dad eventually had grown annoyed of it, and he put something in between the door and the wall so that it would stay closed. At one point, everyone was in their bed, and I would hear the chairs downstairs sliding across the ground. I swear on everything, too, that everyone was in bed, as I was the last one to leave the living room. And not soon after, that same night, I would hear this awful sound, as if something was in the walls and flooring, just tearing it apart. It was so loud, and I remember hiding under my blankets because I was terrified. Another time, we were all in the living room, and my mum had some small figurines on the table. We were watching TV with the dog on the couch when suddenly, one of the figures goes flying across the room as if somebody had just thrown it. My mum jokingly said, Hey, no need to get aggressive." She and Dad always believed in the paranormal and just joked about it. One morning, my sister hysterically ran to my parents' room, and she swore that the eating utensils started moving by themselves. Our dog started becoming more wary and aggressive, not towards us but to furniture and doors, weirdly, especially the basement. At one point, my parents screamed at night and I went to check. They sat there in shock, I think, and I asked what was wrong, and they claimed that there stood a black figure in the corner of the room. Things kept happening too. We heard piano and violin sounds in the attic. We didn't own any instruments, though. My parents at one point saw a black shadow move across the wall towards the window and disappear. My posters were ripped off of the wall on multiple occasions. Plushies in my sister's room would sometimes lay in a circle, and that caused my mum to call Dad hysterically. My dad told me recently that in that house, at one time he woke up with my mum's hand around his neck, as she stared at him with a smile and was laughing silently before she just disappeared. My mum said that she often saw the figure, a humanoid fully black figure with a veil. She often had scratches and bite marks too. In winter of 2010, the boiler in the house broke and we just simply moved. Everything kept going wrong, and when we moved, I started getting attacks. I would often have scratches that I at first brushed off as to me just scratching myself in my sleep. But one time I came home and greeted my mum and made a hissing sound from pain. I lifted up my jacket and hoodie and clear as day, there were 3 brand new scratch marks. They were on my hips, just bleeding. I remember at one point I put some coins on my bed. I don't remember why. I walked to the living room to ask my parents something, and as I turned around, I hear a sort of clanging noise, because one of the coins somehow got thrown towards me. Now, there's a lot more that I could go on with, but I'll stop here as I don't want this to get too long. Stuff like this still happens at times too, and unfortunately in 2012, my sister, middle child, passed away due to a brain hemorrhage. And weirdly, when she died, everything sort of calmed down a bit. Maybe she's protecting us or something? I really do hope so, but if you have any questions or want any additional stuff, then please do feel free to ask in the comments below. There's plenty more for me to talk about, but like I said, I'll leave it here. I started this back in September last year, but I never got around to sharing it. I am now, though, due to an uncomfortable situation again. So, I have to get some context out of the way first. Let me start off by saying that I live in an apartment complex by a golf course or country club on the edge of town. Since not many people live in this area, it can get pretty quiet at night too. The complex is built partially into a small hill at the end of the road, with my apartment being on the back corner of the building on the ground floor. So the bottom of the windows in the living room and both bedrooms start literally a few inches above the ground outside. There is a sort of small trail behind my apartment building that goes through a small wooded patch. I don't have much of a view since my living room windows face a good 15 to 20 foot patch of grass before a tree line separating it from a few houses on the next street over. But this story, it has been ongoing for the last couple of months. Not entirely sure if this is just paranoia or coincidental too. Last summer, a family moved into a house on the next street over, a couple of houses down from my apartment. I've only seen one middle-aged man and a dog so far, but I was taking my Shih Tzu Harley outside one day while he was out in his backyard just standing with his arms crossed swaying side to side. It was sort of like an NPC character in 2000s video games waiting to be interacted with. The dumpster shed area is in view of his backyard too. We made eye contact, so I sort of awkwardly waved and then just looked at my phone while Harley did her business. But I could tell from my peripheral vision that he didn't look away from us. We have the same breed of dogs, so I just assumed that he was probably thinking of letting them meet sometime. But I wondered why he didn't have his dog outside with him at this moment. In the end, I just went back inside quickly after Harley was done. Now, my younger brother lives in the same complex as I do, but on the second floor, and he told me that every now and then he'd see that man take his dog out into his backyard, but cross the tree line into the complex yard. He would circle the building slowly, a little too close to the building before going back into his house. In September of last year, my boyfriend at the time and I split up. The night that I told him to leave, I went to a friend's house to vent. I didn't want to leave Harley home alone too long, so after about an hour or so, I came back to my apartment. I knocked out on the couch while I had a black screen rain sound video on YouTube on. I woke up at around 2 a.m. to Harley going absolutely crazy though, barking and growling. The other couch is right under the main window in my living room. Harley had climbed up the couch and was barking at the window between the curtains. I get up to get her down and to be quiet when my stomach dropped when I realized something. The curtains are on the thinner side and I can normally faintly see the streetlights from the next street over through the curtains. I started getting a little bit nervous, realizing that there was a black mass blocking some of the lights above where Harley was standing. I grabbed the remote to shut the TV off while I was getting closer to the window. The TV turns off in the sort of style of retro TVs where the picture sort of closes in on itself. When I turned it off, the flash animation on the TV illuminated the room briefly, and it was enough that I was able to make out the form of someone dressed in black or dark clothes, crouched down, looking into my window. In the flash, they probably saw me too because they ran away quickly. I picked up Harley and ran to the kitchen to grab a knife and went to my room and I locked the door. I texted my ex asking if he was outside of the window just then, and he replied no and asked what was happening. I didn't believe him though because he's never awake that late and told him that I was about to call the police, so to just tell me the truth and all that. But he told me that I should call them either way and sent me his live location showing that he was at his friend's house over an hour away. I called the police and let them know that I had seen someone outside of my window. They came and looked around, finding nothing obviously. An officer did tell me though that they would keep somebody in the area, so to just call back if anything else happened. Over the next couple of weeks around the same time, 2 or 3 a.m. each night, Harley would freak out at the window. By the time that I would get there, I couldn't see anyone outside though. Fast forward now to May of 2024. This last week I went through my storage closet and found some of my ex's things. I was out with some friends tonight when he came to pick them up. He ended up texting me to come home so that we could talk about something important. I get home and I notice that he has a sort of puzzled look on his face. I asked what couldn't have been just texted to me, and he told me that while he was loading his stuff in his truck, he took Harley out quick, and he was approached by an older lady that lives on the second floor. Now, the dumpster is at the end of the parking lot, and if you turn right, you'll face the side of the building in the general area outside of my living room window. There's a few big trees keeping the area back there pretty dark. Even during the summer, it's pretty much deeply shaded. And she said that as she was taking her trash out, she heard a twig snap or something like that, and looked in the direction that it came from. She said that she saw a man outside of my window, not just walking around. He was up close peering into my living room, one hand up on the window trying to block the light so that he could see, and his phone in the other hand pointing inside of my apartment. She yelled out asking him what the heck he was doing, but he just acted like he didn't hear her and walked away slowly in the opposite direction. She said that it would have been one thing if he was just walking through the yard and sort of glanced over at my window, but he was apparently full on pressing his face against the glass looking in and recording allegedly. My blood instantly ran cold and I got goosebumps. I have since then bought a Ring camera, which is honestly something I should have done a long time ago, but I'll update if anything else happens. So please, do wish me luck. So me and my husband decided to go to a lookout spot that is known for paranormal. It's called Dover Lights. It's known for coloured orbs that will fly around in the sky with no particular pattern. They are apparently all different colours as well, and I've seen them twice. Scientists have come and can't find any explanation for them, but that's not what this is about. This place is deep in a wooded area, and on top of a mountain that you can see for miles when you get to the top, where the lookout is. It's about a 45-minute to an hour drive from our home. We left a little after 11 p.m. and it was a pretty clear night that night. Well, by the time that we reached our destination at the top, a huge storm had come out of pretty much nowhere. It was lightning and thundering and raining really hard as well. It had been my idea to go there, but as soon as my husband turned off the truck, I was stuck with a fear. I began to cry and told him that I wanted to go. He asked me why, and I just kept telling him that I didn't know why, but I didn't want to be there anymore. So we started to drive back down the winding dirt road. About halfway down the mountain, lightning struck. It was so close that I jumped to the floorboard of the truck and my husband threw on the brakes. I said, "What the heck?" He said that the lightning nearly hit the truck at that point. I climbed back up onto my seat as he began moving again, and I spotted something glowing red about maybe 15 feet into the woods. I couldn't pull my eyes away because it felt like it was looking at us too. It was completely black except for its red eyes. It had something similar to pointing bat-like ears and wings that were tucked behind on its back, but you could see them over its shoulder, its pointy wings. It was about 3.5 foot tall and was in mid-stride when we spotted it. It was the feeling that it brought with it that was so scary. I felt heavy, thick darkness, like the whole world had gone dark black sort of feeling, and that's the only way to explain it. Like nothing I'd ever felt before or afterward. It felt like something was poking around in my head as well, and I now realize that whatever it was, I think it was trying to read my thoughts, but couldn't and was slightly annoyed by that. I really don't know how else to explain that feeling as well, but my eyes and its eyes were still locked. It was only a few seconds, but it seemed like time just wasn't even moving. As we continued driving past, neither one of us, me or my husband, said anything for a few seconds. Quietly, without looking at my husband though, I whispered, "Did you see that?" He looked at me and said, "You saw it too?" I said yes, and then he looked at me and said, "What the heck was that?" We were driving fast now, trying to get out of these woods and away from that mountain. I said that it was a demon, I think, and my husband doesn't much believe in things like that, but he said that he never wanted to think or talk about it ever again. It scared him, and I could tell. He doesn't get scared by much, but he just didn't know what it was, I guess, and his words were, it was nothing good, and not from this world. We've talked about it every now and then, and we even thought about it later. It was just a few seconds after that lightning had almost struck our truck as well, and that had to be somehow connected to it. It was too weird for the lightning, and then for a second later, that thing to appear like that, mid-stride in the woods. It wasn't just coincidence, is what I'm getting at. I'm pretty firmly committed too that it was a demon, because the feelings that surrounded it were dark and turned everything dark around it as well. I just want to know though what demon it would be, I guess. I've looked for years now online and never found anything that looked like it. I'm also thinking that those pointy ears were actually black horns and maybe not ears at all. It didn't have any features on its face, just the eyes glowing red, pointy wings folded back and all black. It had 2 legs, obviously, because it was walking on them. It was about 3.5 feet tall, but it was absolutely terrifying. It seemed intelligent too, because it saw us and it was thinking just like we were. I could tell by its eyes. I don't know how I know that, but I just do, and maybe it told me in a way that it just popped into my mind or whatever. Whatever the case, it seemed just as intelligent as we are, actually perhaps even smarter than we are, I suppose. But anyway, could anyone else please tell me if they know about this creature maybe? The place is Dover Lights, and I think it might be a place for things to pass through easier, like a portal or something. If you know anything else that might be helpful as well, then please do let me know. I'm truly very curious to find out why we came across this thing and if it came through with the lightning or something. I know that this all sounds crazy, but if you've been through something like this, then you know how just disconcerting it really is. This happened last winter. Fog starts setting in my city at the time of sunset, and it gets really dark pretty quickly here. Now, my university has a policy of not interfering in anything that happens outside, even if it's right outside the gate in front of the guards and all that. And a few days before my stare down, there was some talk going around about a student's phone getting snatched right outside of uni or whatever. One day though, me and my boyfriend were sitting in the car outside, right beside the college wall and around 20 meters away from the college gate. He wanted to use the restroom and asked me to come inside with him, but I was like, nah, I'm just too tired and you go and I'll wait here. So he went, leaving his phone with me. I was using my phone sitting inside on the full brightness setting, when suddenly a bike beelined towards the car. The two men sitting on it had those ski masks on and started tapping the car window on the driver's side with a gun. It's important to note that the passenger side where I was sitting was right beside a gutter, so they couldn't come too close to me. They backed off and again came forward, tapping the window, looking at me through the windshield and motioning for me to roll down the window. But honestly, I was way too stunned to do anything, and eventually they just drove away when they saw other people approaching. All I wanted to do was save my boyfriend's phone, which was under my thigh, so mission accomplished, I guess. But sometimes I wonder if those people hadn't have showed up when they did, what might have actually happened. As a Muslim, we believe that those entities that anyone encounters, such as ghosts, poltergeists, apparitions, etc., they're all jinn, and some of them just there to scare people for the sake of pranking. Others, though, are absolutely evil and might literally harm you, like scratching or perhaps even worse. With that said, a long time ago I was staying at a relative's house. He was my uncle. He had a wife and 2 kids, and they had a decent house. Nothing big or anything. But keep in mind that the apartment is on the ground floor, and you might hear kids playing or yelling outside. They keep the window open quite often as well, but anyway, I was there alone at some point, and they had gone out to the mall with my mother. I didn't want to join because it would have been boring to join them, so I decided to stay and just play video games that day, and the night started pretty fine. Some time passed though, and that was when I started hearing some noises, like kids talking. I brushed it off though, as I thought that it could have been some of the kids outside, as I mentioned before. But I kept hearing it louder and louder, and I went to check the window, but there wasn't a single person outside. So I decided to shut the window and go back to my game. Some time passed, and I started hearing children talking and yelling. This time, though, it was a little bit louder again, as if someone was inside the house. At that, I got startled and I began to check around, only to find absolutely nothing. When I sat down again and I went back to playing, the noises started up again. This time it was getting louder and louder as well, and I had a headset back then and I put it on. It was connected to the monitor so that I could hear the game. The noises became so loud that even with the headset on, I could still hear it. And mind you, I was completely terrified at this point. And just like that, the noises just stopped all of a sudden. And it was then that I felt someone pulling the back of my shirt up. I jumped up like I've never jumped before, and I just ran out of the house. From that day on, too, I never went back to that house again, and when I opened the door, I found my father outside of the house about to ring the door. He looked at my face and asked what was wrong. I told him the story, but he didn't believe me. However, he told me not to bring that up to my relatives so I wouldn't be disrespectful. When I saw my mother, I told her the story, and by the look on her face, I could tell that she believed every word that I had said. Because later I found out that my relatives used to do seances in this house, and even his wife and children used to experience stuff too. Needless to say, that was one of the most terrifying experiences that I have ever had. And since then, I tried my best to never get scared of encounters like that. I've had other experiences after that, such as noises and taps and similar stuff, but I learned that if you pay them no mind and you don't show any fear, that eventually they just leave you alone. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my story, and it's certainly something that sticks with me. I really hope too that nothing like this ever happens again. I lived in a haunted house at a really early age, though despite this, my memory remains fresh of most of these encounters. We were there for a year, so I must have been 3 or 4 during this. I lived with my older brother, older than me by 3 years, younger sister, younger by 3 years, so just a baby at that time, mother and father. The house looked overgrown. Thin vines grew on the walls, large bushes in front of the windows, and it was fenced in the front with a large gate circling the backyard. The hauntings, though, they started pretty quickly. My mum, for instance, would hear heavy boot stomps up the stairs, despite nobody being there. My father would get locked out of the house despite nobody being inside. And my brother would hear doors opening, but I definitely got the worst of it. I was looking out of my window, watching my mother go to work. She had a double shift, and my dad wasn't the best of dads, to put it lightly. But I stared until I noticed a large pitch-black snake following her to her car. The snake looked to be double her in length, despite its slithering, thus curling its body. My mother is 5'8", which makes the snake probably around 11 foot long, but it had followed her for a couple of minutes until she had gotten into her car. Then it slithered back into the bushes near my window. I looked down to see it looking right at me. Despite this, though, I would still go outside and play like other kids. Playing in the backyard till dusk, my brother and I were playing separately. My brother, loving sports, ran around throwing a football, whereas I played with one of my toy animals. The one toy in specific was a big T-Rex that I had. The T-Rex looked like one of the older renditions before Jurassic Park, upright with its tail dragging the ground. And as the sun set further, our mother called us inside for dinner. So we went inside, and I noticed that I had left my toy and went to go and get it. It was dark to the point where I couldn't really make out the noticeable color, but not too dark so as I couldn't see outlines and the detail of objects and all that. And I noticed the T-Rex chilling right by the tree where I had left it. I went to go and pick it up, only for it to crumble, because it was dirt in the shape of the T-Rex. I got freaked out at that, and I ran back inside. Now, notice earlier that I said that I can remember most of these encounters, but the reason why I point this out is because my father said that he'd often see me sitting in the corner of my room or in the front of a blank screen. He'd ask me what I was doing, and I would simply say that the old man told me to. I have no recollection of these happening, but my father swears up and down that this happened more than a few times. But this last one was definitely the most horrific. So, waking up in the middle of the night, I heard footsteps. Luckily, my TV was on, so I still had some light. But thinking that it was my dad, I got up to go to see him. But when I opened the door, there was just an old man standing there. He looked down at me and, honestly, looked corpse-like. I freaked out and I banged on my mother's bedroom door. She opened it and I hollered about how there was an ugly man in the house. She took it as someone actually breaking in, and she picked me up with one hand and had a bat in the other and basically ran around the house, turning every light on and cussing loud enough to worry some of our neighbors. But in the end, we never found anyone in the house. I still very much remember, though, looking at that guy, and he was real, like as real as my mum was, and I just cannot explain it. Anyways, those are my encounters from this place that I've always found the scariest and the ones that have always stuck with me the most. So, I don't believe in ghosts or paranormal stuff. I think that most of the stuff that you read online or you hear about is fictional or made up. But, with that said, here is my experience from working at an elder care. So my shift always ended 11 p.m, so at 10:30 p.m, the corridors are always silent and dark, everyone is asleep, and we're just sitting in our office and sipping some tea, me and my colleague. We have motion detectors in every room installed, and they're connected to our working phones, and we can see live feed from the phones as well. All of a sudden, though, at 10:35, I get a notification of movement in a patient's room. I was only 19, and I told my other colleague that there is no way in heck that I'm going in there to check it out on my own. At the beginning, I wasn't expecting much, to be honest, because patients do move at night, so it's pretty normal. What we did instead was we opened our phone to see the image that was taken when the movement was detected, and upon opening the app, I see a picture of a weird object in the middle of the room. Whatever it was kind of floating. The object cannot be described because, it had legs and wide in the middle. I don't know if it had a head, but I froze and my colleague did too. I took screenshots. We ran to the room, and when we went inside, the patient was sleeping and nobody was in the middle of the room. The morning after, I showed the images to my bosses and they couldn't believe it. They were not shocked either. They say that it's eldercare and apparently it's a haunted place. I don't know if I still have the pictures, but even if I did, I doubt that I could share them because the picture shows the identity of the patient as well. Also, the section I worked in was only for people with severe dementia and they couldn't walk. So there was that too. I was in Venice this time last year, and I still cannot get my head around how and why this happened. So I was there for 3 nights. It was my first time in Venice, and I loved it. I was there with friends, but due to our poor planning, all 4 of us stayed in different hotels. I chose one near the station, which was an intimate hotel ran by a religious family. It was a classic old villa facing a canal, and the place had a chapel as well, a garden, and full of religious merch and decorations throughout. My room was on the 2nd floor. You had to climb 3 sets of stairs, and on the top you were met with a marble square lobby with a round table in the middle. There were 4 rooms around this lobby, and the rest of the rooms continued on 2 corridors that stretched on either side of the lobby. My room was one of the rooms attached to this lobby, a single room that looked over the canal. It was a simple, small room composed of a single bed with a cross above the head, a basin, and a wardrobe. It was a cheap and cheerful hotel, and I slept like a baby the first 2 nights I was there. But on my 3rd and final night, I had trouble getting to sleep, and the loud neighbor who was watching videos didn't help, but I had to bang on their wall around 1 a.m, after which they stopped and I fell asleep. But I remember feeling uneasy and agitated that night for some reason. I eventually woke up sometime around 3:30 to 4:30, which wasn't unusual for me as I don't sleep that well. But that was when I heard a group of loud wailing people in the building. It echoed into my room via the hall. At this point, I remember thinking that the source of this noise was either coming from the stairs or the bottom of it. I was initially annoyed, thinking that there were a bunch of drunkards who came in after night out or whatever. Then it suddenly hit me that the hotel had a 12 a.m. curfew. It was unlikely a group of people suddenly coming out of their rooms to cause a commotion as well. Eventually, I came to my senses, which made me more aware of this mysterious wailing. It was loud, almost in despair, and crescendoed over and over, echoing into the lobby. I eventually realized that this was, or they were, definitely not human. It's hard to explain, but something in me knew by the sound that whatever this was not alive, in one form or another, and humans could just not really make this noise. I have never, ever felt like this before, and it was a strange experience, but then the wailing finally stopped. I was relieved, but what happened next is something that I will never forget. The sound resumed, but this time from the foot of my bed. This thing or these things were wailing in my room at the foot of my bed, very much present, closer and louder. I don't know what happened after that because as soon as I heard them, I just blacked out or passed out and I woke up on the floor at around 7 in the morning. To my surprise, I didn't feel as scared until later on in the day, where I tried to recap what on earth happened. To this day, I still cannot explain what this was. I wasn't a paranormal enthusiast or believer, and believed I would stay this way until proven wrong, I guess, but I'm pretty easily spooked, I suppose, and always thought that I'd end up crying or screaming if I encountered a ghost. My theory is that my body just went into extreme fear after this thing came into my room and simply shut down, hence the passing out. I do think about this pretty often though, and I always get chills when I think about it. I'd love to hear what everyone here thinks about this though, thoughts, theories, etc. I've never gone back to that place, and I don't intend to either. But if you live around there, or if you've had any experience with things around there, then I would love to know. This happened to me last year. So I was up late working on an art project in my living room, the windows wide open. I lived in the first floor apartment. Very often too, I felt as if something or someone was watching me, and it knew that I knew, and I got the feeling that I was not supposed to know, if that makes sense. It felt like someone was directly outside of my window though, staring straight at me, unwavering. Anyway, it was probably about 1 or 2 in the morning at this point when I heard what sounded like a very distant cry for help from a woman. This calling was so quiet that it was just barely audible. That's how far away it sounded. But at the same time, I couldn't shake this eerie feeling that it was actually quite close. It was really confusing, and I chalked it up to exhaustion and that it was probably all in my head. But then, just as the screaming stopped, I heard a voice, so clear, so close, so haunting, whispered directly into my ear. I could almost feel their cold breath, and it said, "I know you can hear me." This voice, although only a whisper, echoed throughout the room. It was so articulate as well. I mean, there was no mistaking that it was a message whatsoever, undeniable, and that whatever this thing was, it was right there next to me, and I could hear it. Every now and then I think about this, and it always chills me to the bone, even a year later afterward. This was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my entire life, and even now I can't fully articulate the fear that shook me to my core because of this. The juxtaposition of it all too, like the distant screams were so quiet, but that was the loudest whisper that I'd ever heard, and I can assure you that there was absolutely nobody there. I want to tell my sister's potentially paranormal story from about 4 years ago. It's the most potent story that I've heard from somebody that I know personally. So, she was working in the cafe at Chawton House in Hampshire, UK, a Grade 2 listed manor house. It has a Wikipedia page if you want to check it out. It was the evening, must have been working an event or something, and she was upstairs alone when the door— now, this is a big 300+ year old heavy wooden door, so I think we can discount the wind catching it— swung open and closed again, except nobody walked in. What makes it creepier is that this door is key-coded, so there's really no way of opening it unless the code is typed in. Clearly this made my sister slightly nervous, as she had heard that the house was haunted before, but she carried on with what she was doing on the till. But then, the till started working by itself, buttons being pressed erratically, and whatever she did, she just couldn't stop it. At this point, she started to really panic. She hates the paranormal. When the manager walked in, she took my sister outside into the yard to try and calm her down and explain the old classic, "Oh yes, that's Lady XYZ of the house, and she likes to roam the floor," when all the old-style outdoor lights in the yard started to dim and come back again. Well, that was the last straw for my sister, so she told the manager, to heck with this, handed over her apron and bolted down the long driveway back to her car, in the dark. I asked her, weren't you scared to run down that driveway in the dark after all of that? And she replied, no, I just wanted to get the heck away from that place. It's something that we still talk about often, and whenever I think about it, it always bothers me. So, I'd like to tell you about an experience that I had recently that honestly disturbed me. I don't know if it was real, a nightmare, or something else, but I cannot explain it. So first of all, you need to know that my bedroom and my mother's bedroom are opposite each other. So from my door I can see my mother's bedroom, which is at the end of the corridor. What's more, my window faces my door and therefore my corridor. It was the middle of the night and the moon was shining brightly that night, so it was quite easy to see the bedroom and the corridor without too much difficulty. During the night, I woke up and was facing my window, curled up on top of myself. That was when I saw a face opposite my bed that I could well describe to you. It was a young man, I'd say in his 20s, with a fairly thin face and hollow cheeks. He had red hair, short with curls on top. The most terrifying thing about him, though, was that he was looking towards my bedroom door with a horrified look frozen on his face. I mean, he didn't move an inch, as if it was a painting that I was seeing, but he looked so real. At that moment, I had a feeling of terror that ran through my body. I was still curled up, and I didn't dare move or turn around towards my door, where the young man was looking. My body was telling me not to move, my eyes were glued to the side, and I just couldn't move. My body froze, and I felt sick to my stomach, and I had the feeling that if I moved, something serious was going to happen. I stayed like that for a few minutes, and then at one point, it was completely calm. The young man was gone, and it was quiet. Maybe a little too quiet, actually, like the calm you feel when you realize what had just happened. After that, though, I couldn't contain myself from turning back towards my corridor, and that's when I caught sight of a silhouette. It was transparent, but it was as if you could see the outline of its silhouette. It's hard to explain, but the only thing that I know is that when I looked at this thing, I didn't feel at all comfortable, and I was even a little bit scared. After all of that, I didn't look far and went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until the next day that I thought about it again, and I spoke to my mother about it, but she couldn't come up with an explanation either. And that's why I'm here. Do you guys have any idea what this could have been? So this was about 3.5 years ago, but I think about it pretty much every day. I'll start by saying that I was not being very smart, and I know that. So, I was in Miami with a friend, who is now my boyfriend, and we were vacationing or blowing off some steam. I was 28, he was 25. We are both gay, and I decided to download Grindr and see what was going on. Long story short, I met a guy and went to his place for some fun. We had at it, and I had a good time, and we had some drinks. I was feeling great. It was about 11 p.m. at night, and time to wrap up and head back to the hotel. I saw that it was about a mile walk, literally straight down the road, so I head out. And well, I had taken some Adderall and was feeling a little more reckless than I normally am, and decided maybe I would hook up with somebody else. I know, but I log back on Grindr and instantly connect with a really hot guy. He invites me over, gives me his address, and also says that he could come and pick me up. So I'm just standing there on the edge of this sidewalk, wondering if I'm going to get picked up, or call an Uber to this location, or just go home. And someone pulls up in a truck and says that they're here to pick me up. I'm like, oh wow, you came, that's really nice. I literally remember looking at the picture and at the guy and feeling very confident that they were the same person, so I hopped in the truck. Instantly, though, I just had the weirdest feeling rush over me. The truck smelled weird too, first of all. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like the taste of licking iron, maybe. I was instantly turned off and felt really weird about that, though. Anyway, he starts driving. Thankfully, I didn't close out the Grinder app too when he pulled up because it was so abrupt, because I looked down and literally noticed that I'm getting further away from the guy that I was talking to, which means that they were not the same person. But this guy looked exactly like this person. But the weirdest thing was that this guy looked exactly like the person's profile. I remember that I just started texting and talking, being like, "I really like your blonde hair. Your grey truck is really cool. Is this a 2014 Chevy Silverado? I just told my friends about you and have to be home by 12 p.m, just FYI. But we can go to my hotel. They'd love to meet you if you'd like." Trying to make it seem like I have people waiting on me, that I disclosed parts of his identity, anything really. This lasted about 2 to 3 minutes until, eventually, he just pulled over and said that he wasn't feeling like hanging out anymore. I got out and he left, and I got in an Uber and went home. To this day, though, I really do think that I was picked up by someone who saw an easy target. But thankfully, I was slightly resourceful in the moment, enough to get me out of, well, whatever that was. A few years back, I, a 23-year-old female, was driving home after taking my dad to the airport for a late flight. It was already dark when I left the airport, and I still had a 3-hour drive home ahead of me. A few hours into the drive, I get recalculated to some windy backroad highway. There were no cars or streetlights, and so it was a pretty dark and creepy road. As I turned a curve, I noticed a black car come out of nowhere and start to ride my bumper, then the blue lights. The road was so dark that I had to drive for a minute to find a spot with at least a few small lights where I could pull over. The officer came up to my window and asked me if I knew that my tags were expired. I thought that that was kind of odd because I was driving my mum's car and she's usually pretty on top of things like that. But it was more so the way that he talked that made me uneasy, I guess. He was speaking pretty fast, like he was in a hurry or something. He's standing at my window, and before he even gets my license or registration number, his radio beeps and he tells me that he has to go on another call. He then practically runs back to the car and speeds off. I head back home, half weirded out and half thanking God that I didn't get a ticket. I kind of brush it off until I go outside to my car the next day, and I find that my tags were not due to expire for at least another 2 months. It could have been a simple mistake, I get that, but I couldn't help but recall how weird the whole incident was. I mean, he could have misread the number, that's possible I guess, but looking back, I wonder what could have happened if he was someone with bad intentions. Was it just a mistake, or was he a fake cop that was trying to lure people out of their car or something? From then on, I always pull over only in the well-populated areas, and if a safe option is unavailable, I call 911 to make them aware. Because something tells me that there was just not something right about that whole situation. This is a story of someone that I knew and had to cut ties with because, well, he was an absolute psycho. The first half will be to add context as to why I cut him off, and the second half is what makes this story really creepy. So, it all started about 4 years ago when I was living in a friend's house while attending a nearby university. It was myself, my friend, his sister, and their parents. Roughly about 2 weeks into staying there, My friend's sister invited her boyfriend to live in the house too, and by all accounts he was a pretty cool guy at first. Very sociable and full of great stories. We often sat around the table for drinks or talked about life, having a smoke in the garden. Within the first month, however, as he started to get comfortable, cracks started to show in this veneer. He would rant about government conspiracies, how he was always a wronged party. He was big into Sigma male stuff and martial arts, and he did have a temper as well. He had this big dog that he always kept in a cage that was extremely violent when he wasn't around. The dog actually attacked his girlfriend and had to be put down. That was when the guilt trips towards her began and the ranting became incessant. About 2 months later, he had the bright idea to live in a shipping container, mainly because the parents wanted him out, and dragged his girlfriend along for the ride. I'm not talking about one of those sort of chic little restoration jobs. This was a rented container in a storage yard among the outskirts of the town that we were living in. He would intimidate and threaten the staff there constantly until they called the police too. This, of course, was another conspiracy. He became increasingly abusive to his girlfriend as well, to the point where the family got involved to get her out of there. I stuck close to them, having to pretend to be on his side until we could safely get her out. They broke up, which he blamed me for, claiming that I was poisoning her against him to make her mine. She has a new partner now, and they're really happy, so it was never about that. We all blocked the Psycho X on everything possible, but he continued to harass them until, eventually, he disappeared. Or so we thought. You see, fast forward to last year, I started to receive messages over social media from several different accounts, blocking each one in turn when I discovered who it was. Some friendly and some hostile. One of these profiles, however, was pretending to be someone that I knew from university. We talked about life and how things were going, and eventually I was invited to a house party, claiming that it was a free house and plenty of people were coming. I booked the time off work, made my travel plans, and kept talking to this friend, coming up to the date of the party. I mentioned it to my friend's sister, and she was interested in going herself, until I mentioned the address and she panicked. The address in question was a property belonging to the crazy ex's father that was scheduled for sale. I waited until the day of the party and called the police to check the property, claiming that I suspected a break-in. And they found 5 people there, including the ex, and parked out the front was a butcher's van equipped for food storage and a pretty hefty collection of knives, hammers, and rope. And boy, am I really glad that I didn't go. I live pretty far from, well, anyone, and mostly surrounded by forests. I hunt regularly, and I spend a lot of time outside when not running my business. It was early during the hunting season, and around 3 in the morning, I was tracking deer prints, and they just stopped, and an uneasy feeling filled me as something compelled me to look up. And when I did, in a tree was the deer, or what was left of it. It was gutted, but not like how a human hunter would have done it, so I decided to just call it there and head back. As I was making my way back to my truck, I really felt uneasy though, and as if I was being watched. I would periodically look back and check with my nods, and caught 2 very big and very high up eyes looking back, followed by a type of deep yell. Not a roar or a scream, but an actual yell. It didn't sound like a bear or a big cat, but almost like a very big man. Well, as you can imagine, I took off running and I didn't look back. It was a 4-mile run back to my truck, and I didn't stop once. When I made it back and I drove off, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw again something standing silhouetted by the sunrise. When I made it home, I was still shaken up a bit, and I decided to look over my truck. Now, I'm a fairly big guy, standing at 6'6" and weighing about 230, and that was when I noticed that there were handprints bigger than my own hands on my truck. Doing some more investigating, I checked my trail cams and found several offline, and one pointed at the deer hung up in the tree. Now, being someone who's seen a lot of horror movies, and being one not to mess with something that I cannot understand, I never went back to that part of the forest, and eventually decided to move altogether, as at night, I would still hear that yell sometimes. Sometimes my wife would tell me that she felt like someone was watching her from the tree line as well, and being a new parent, I just didn't want to take any chances. I still have no idea what all of that was about, but I'm really glad that we moved. So my family has a house that was custom built for them. The house is 15 years old, and I mean, there shouldn't be any paranormal activity, right? Wrong. I've been seeing shadow figures since 12 years old. I've heard voices, scratching on walls and slamming on windows. My room is 3 stories up, so it had to be coming from inside as well. But there's one experience in particular that I'll never forget. I was getting ready for middle school, walking through our hallway from our kitchen to the front door. I saw a shadow cast by from behind me, but it was still dark outside, so I didn't pay too much mind. But the person must have been between me and the light from our kitchen. I called out everybody's name that lives in the house, but I got no response. At that, I ran to my mum's car and explained to her what had happened. That's when she told me that she has seen them too, and they're apparently only around occasionally. I thought that she was joking at first, until she actively started saying, "Hey, there's a shadow by the door," etc. We still have what we like to call visitors. Some seem to be playful, some wander, and some only stop by once. We'll have a period of 2 to 4 months where we won't see anything. They usually only stay for like 1 day to 1 week. My brother considered himself an atheist until he started seeing figures as well. Now, we're definitely both agnostic. The only reason that I believe that our house is haunted is because any land that could be considered a burial ground for Native Americans might be here, and who knows, unfortunately, we might have built our house on top of one. I recently stayed the night at my childhood home. It's an old house built in the 19th century. I never felt at ease in that house. It's always just had a really eerie vibe to it. When I was 17, my parents told me that they were able to afford this house, mansion, because the previous owners desperately wanted to get rid of it. The reason being is that, unfortunately, their son had hung himself in the attic. Lots of paranormal things have happened to me in that house too, but I'll give you full details of my last encounter. So, it happened last week. I stayed the night there because I had a football game that was close to where my parents were living. I didn't feel like waking up super early, so that's why I held a sleepover in my old bedroom. I went to sleep fairly early, around 10 p.m. or so, not much later than that. Everything felt pretty normal. I made sure that all the doors were locked. My parents were on a wellness retreat in Germany, and my brother moved out a while ago, so it was just me in the house at that time. I went to sleep feeling comfortable and quite at ease, even though I was cautious, given the history of the house. I texted some of my friends goodnight, and that was it. The comfortable feeling, though, suddenly wore off when I was awoken at 3 in the morning, because I heard music playing, but it was muffled. I couldn't hear it clearly, but my first instinct was that it was a car playing music with its windows closed, parked on the street perhaps. I said to myself I'll give it 10 minutes and the car will pass. But the music was still playing 10 minutes later, and I felt annoyed and quite frankly a bit ticked off. I had to wake up early in the morning after all, and this was ruining my sleep. I walked to my bedroom window to see where the music was coming from, ready to throw a fit at whoever was doing it. I opened my blinds, opened the window to look outside, and that was the exact moment that my stomach dropped, because there was no car, nor was there anyone else outside. I realized then that the music was coming from upstairs in the attic. My parents renovated the attic 5 years ago and made it into their bedroom. I knew that it had a radio on my mother's bedside. She never used it though. Most of the time it just wasn't even plugged in because she had only one socket and she used it to charge her phone. It was not a new radio by any means, early 2000s I would guess. My mum held on to it because it was the radio of her departed father, and she just couldn't get rid of it. I was freaking out though. I mean, why would these kind of encounters only happen when I was alone at home? I tried calling my parents, but they didn't pick up. My brother didn't pick up either. Not surprising since it was 3 in the morning. I realized that I would have to deal with this situation alone, so I decided to open the door of my bedroom that led up to the hallway. At the end of the hallway, there was a circling stair that led up to the attic. I opened my bedroom door and the music suddenly became louder, and I now could clearly hear which music was playing. It was dark organ music. At that, my stomach dropped. In fact, I've never felt so scared as I did then. I didn't want to do this alone. I had one last rescue line that I could call. It was my friend Philip. He played COD with me until the early hours, so he surely was still awake. I called him and explained the situation. He reassured me that it was probably a problem with an electric outlet that had jump-started that radio or something. I felt reassured by his answers and made the walk upstairs to the attic. I was with him on the phone the whole time, and I stood in front of the door and I could clearly hear the music now. It was so loud as well. I knew that I had to get in to turn it off, but I was absolutely petrified. Philip reassured me that everything was going to be alright and it was just faulty wiring. I kept telling myself that repeatedly, that it was just faulty wiring as well. Eventually I mustered up the courage and I opened up the door. And as soon as I did, that music immediately stopped. My friend also heard it stop as well. And at that, I instantly ran downstairs, put on all the lights, and watched Trailer Park Boys until 7 in the morning. The next day, I played the worst football game that I had ever played. We lost 7-0. So, to start this, I usually have sleep paralysis at least once every 2 weeks. I've had it my whole life, so I pretty much am used to it now. I either close my eyes and go back to sleep, or sometimes I can fight it and sort of snap out of it. Anyway, yesterday I checked into my hotel, laid out my clothes, and sat my backpack down on the extra couch hotels usually have. This is pretty much routine for me as well. I left and grabbed dinner. When I got back, I noticed the TV was on. I never turned it on when I first got to my hotel. I didn't really think much of it and brushed it off. I chilled for a while and then fell asleep by 9-ish. I woke up randomly at 3 in the morning, but in sleep paralysis again. I was sleeping on my side, and as soon as I opened my eyes, there she was, a random woman sitting on my couch. So elegant looking and the perfect posture. My heartbeat rose and I locked my eyes with her. For some reason, I was scared. I wanted to snap out of my paralysis because I genuinely thought that somebody had broken in or something, but it just seemed a little bit off this time. It was just the way that she was sitting and what she was wearing, I guess. All white with her straight long brushed hair looking dead straight. She wasn't moving, just straight up existing, but not existing at the same time. But this was the moment that I knew that something was very wrong. But my fear grew, and I thought that if I snapped out of my paralysis, she would hear me. But when I say that I can snap out of it, I really mean snap my body to the left or right to fully wake myself up. But in the end, I went with the second option. I just closed my eyes and went back to sleep. I woke up at around 6 in the morning, and it took me a minute or two to remember what I had seen just a few hours before. I shot up and looked beside my bed, in my bathroom, just anywhere to look to see if she was hiding anywhere. Just because it was daytime and I was not in paralysis, I was ready to kick some butt, I guess. But it wasn't until I saw my couch that caused my confidence to drain pretty quickly. You see, some of my things that I said inside the couch the day prior were suddenly reorganized, in a way where one side of the couch was pushed to the other side, but neatly, in a way to where someone could sit on the other side, I guess. I inspected the side where I saw her sitting, and I could immediately tell the difference, as there was still an imprint or the cushion being lower than the other, which also means that it was fresh. Whoever she was, she had been sitting there for quite some time. So to begin, I would appreciate any input as to what you think this could have been. Whether you believe it was a person or something paranormal, I would really just appreciate any input at all. So on Tuesday, my best friend S and her roommates T and J were talking about our old high school at some point. Our school was built on top of a burial ground, and several students who have gone to that school there have passed away tragically, unrelated to the school. And well, they decided to break in at 3 in the morning to explore what the school was like now. We're 20, so we graduated only 2 years ago. Jay was scared and didn't want to go inside, so she stayed in my friend's car in the driver's seat in case they all needed to leave quickly. S and her other roommate T decided to jump the gate and go exploring. They thought that the energy seemed kind of scary, but they were too curious and kept walking. They reached this one classroom in the back, and that's when my friend looked inside. She said the lights in the hallways were red, and when she looked into the classroom, she said that she saw a black silhouette of a person in the classroom close to the door. She said that even though she couldn't make out a face, she felt that it was watching them. She grabbed T and told her calmly that they needed to leave because someone was there, and they sprinted back to the car and they all left. They then went to our old middle school to see what it looked like now. They couldn't get in because the gates were locked, so Jay asks S if she wants to get back into the driver's seat, since it's her car, and S declines. Jay pulls out and leaves. It's about 3:30 to 3:45 in the morning at this point. As she pulls out and starts driving back to their apartment, they see these 2 white blinding lights coming towards them. They couldn't tell if it was a car since the lights were so bright, but 2 seconds later they realized that it was a wrong-way driver coming at them at about 80 miles an hour, and Jay was able to swerve around it last second as the car just zoomed straight past them without realizing. Luckily, they saw cops pulled over on the side of the road ahead. They told the cops, and they immediately dispatched someone to go follow the car and find where they were. They were silent for the rest of the night because of how terrifying the experience was. But the scary part is that last week, a girl who just graduated from our high school was driving up to Maryland for Thanksgiving with her parents to visit her brother, who happened to be in our grade, and they swerved into the southbound lane and died in a head-on collision. S was telling her roommates about it right before they left the middle school and almost died. She is 100% convinced that she saw a person at the school, but isn't sure if it was a real person or something else. Our school doesn't have late security or cleaners or anything, and I'm not sure why, but when she told me the story, I felt a strong gut feeling that it was something else. The night just felt too perfectly lined up as well. I mean, the whole thing was really weird. I do believe that humans are scarier than anything paranormal, but my gut just tells me that she encountered something else, and that the events that transpired throughout the night were somehow related to it. But again, if anyone could give any input or insights as to what this could have been, then I would really appreciate it. Thanks. I was somewhere between the age of 10 and 14 when this happened. Growing up, I lived on a very boring street in a middle-class one-story house. My bedroom faced the front veranda, which had a lot of plants on it. Just around the corner and down the hall from my bedroom was a study that was used as a spare room or a computer room. Now, I used to watch TV in that room, and on this particular night, it was very hot, so I had opened the door open to the veranda. There was a thin fly screen with no lock, which we could pull across when the door was open. When I went to bed that night, it was so hot that I kept my bedroom windows and curtains wide open. I was having trouble sleeping, and I just laid there staring at the ceiling for some time. But then I heard what sounded like someone walking around on the veranda. The ground was cement pebbles, and there was a lot of dirt from the plants there, and it made a very distinct sound when you walked on it. At first, I assumed it was one of my parents, but it was very late at night, and that wouldn't have made much sense. So I craned my neck to look at the window, and in the dark I saw a gaunt, skeletal, hunched-over figure slowly shuffling towards my bedroom window. It made a sort of raspy sound as it shuffled around. I was fairly certain that it couldn't see me, but from the way its head was moving, it looked like it was searching for something. Now, this might sound weird, but despite this fairly creepy thing happening outside of my bedroom window, I still felt somehow safe in the comfort of my bed inside my locked house. But then I realized that I had left the study door open, which meant that all that stood between, well, whatever the heck this thing was, and my house was a thin screen door with no lock. I knew that I had to lock the door in quickly. This thing was almost at my bedroom window and would soon be at the study door. I slid out of bed and crawled on my stomach out of my room and down the hall to the study, and as I reached the door, intending to quickly close it, I suddenly realized my mistake. I would have to open the screen door in order to reach the door to close it. From where I was laying, I could see this thing hunched over and peering into my bedroom window. I think it heard or sensed me laying there because it turned and shuffled over and bent down to where I was laying. I held my breath as this thing put its face against the screen and peered in at me. Its raspy breath sounded like death as well. In the dark, I could make out a part of a face, and whatever it was, it looked gaunt, sickly, either very thin or no skin. I couldn't see any eyes, or they were simply empty sockets perhaps. I didn't dare move as its face pressed up against the fly screen, seemingly looking right at me. Suddenly, though, its face distorted in terror, its eye sockets and mouth opened wide, and it just let out this curdling shriek, a shriek that sounded like fear, and then it just bolted off into the night. I lay there silently frozen in fear and disbelief over what the heck had just happened, and also listening intently to make sure that it was actually gone. As soon as I dared to move, I quickly opened the fly screen and shut and locked that veranda door. I then went back to my room and shut the windows and drew the curtains. I kept peeking through the curtain, expecting for it to come back, but it never did. Now, I've thought about this encounter ever since then, and I've never really been sure what to make of it. I've never told anyone about it either. I didn't know where to begin, and I've never really understood why it reacted in fear when it saw me like that. It is still one of the most unexplainable and strangest things that has ever happened to me, and I don't know what to think about it. So, before I get into this story, I would like to affirm that everything said is 100% real. In the following months, I've been trying to debunk this in any way possible, but I've been unsuccessful. This story takes place in Charleston, South Carolina, specifically Isle of the Palms, during a family vacation in September of 2023. We stayed in a rental home that I won't name for privacy or potential legal reasons, just a few steps away from the ocean though. I shared a room with my mother, which had 2 twin-size beds, and to start off, the moment that we arrived at this vacation home, the door slammed shut by itself, almost smashing my grandmother's hand. Now, this could be explained by the door being heavy, I guess, but that doesn't explain why every night we stayed at this location, the doors would open and close themselves. It didn't matter if the doors were locked, had stuff in the way, etc. The main culprit of the door opening and closing was my bedroom door, and I was sick at this time and had a very poor sleep schedule, so I would usually stay up at really odd hours anyway. My mother was staying in the same room as me, and she would lock the door every night, so I didn't make any noise to wake her up. Without fail, however, that door would always slam open. I would close it again, then an hour or so later, it would slam open again. This even happened right in front of me a few times as well, which really freaked me out. Please note too that the opening and closing was not limited to that one door. Every door in the place would do this, just mine was more prevalent than the others, I guess. For example, my grandparents' room opened just a creak and stopped the second that I looked at it. But anyway, at around our 5th day of our stay, I was pretty tired after returning from a large dinner. I decided that it would be best to try and take a short nap, while the rest of my family went out to the beach for a while. This would turn out to be a huge mistake. Everyone left one by one, and I could hear the large door open and close as each person left. The house was quiet for around 30 minutes. I had not yet fallen asleep, but I had covered my head in a blanket, something that usually helped me to fall asleep in the day. After a short time under this blanket, I felt what I can only describe as a depression in the bed, a very distinct sensation of someone sitting with their hands on each side of their body. Keep in mind, this is a very small twin-size bed. If there were one of my family members, I would be able to feel them brush against my body. However, the only thing that I felt was the indentations on the bed. From what I could tell, it felt like a small woman sitting down. Not a lot of weight, but just enough to definitely be able to feel them sitting next to me. They said nothing, did nothing, didn't even move, and this shocked me, obviously. After a few minutes, whatever it was making the indentation on the bed seemed to stand up and just leave. I did end up falling asleep after this by some miracle. However, my fever had gotten much worse at this point as well. And that's pretty much it. Please do let me know if you have any ideas or similar experiences. I would say that I'm more of a skeptic, but honestly, this was kind of crazy to me. If anyone has any questions, then I'd be happy to answer, but like I said, I've been racking my brain over this for some time now, and I really just cannot explain this. So I'm a logger in northern BC, Canada. I'm an avid hunter and have spent many a nights hunting alone. That being said, quite a few years ago, I was working on a broken down skidder in the dark after everyone on the logging block was gone, changing a blown hydraulic hose under the cab, when I felt like I was being just watched or something. The feeling continued to get worse too, and so I was sort of on edge and continued to work on replacing the blown hose. Every trip for tools to the service truck and back, I would sort of scan for eyes in the nearby tree line, maybe about 25 meters away with my flashlight. There was nothing. I continued to work on the pain-in-the-butt hose that you literally have to dive your head and upper body under the cab to reach, until your legs are sort of stuck up in the air and feeling vulnerable. And the feeling of being watched gets even more intense. All the hairs on my neck are standing, and I hear a two-tone whistle from far away, almost as if it was the wind. It was so far away, but it was flat and calm that day. Also, there was about 6 inches of fresh snow on the ground, but I pushed myself out from under the skidder and looked around quietly with a flashlight for eyes in the tree line and down the road. Again, there's nothing. I had one side of the hose fitting to remove still, and it was the easier side and higher up, so I wasn't butt up in the air trying to remove it. I put my head back under the cab and quickly began to spin the fitting loose, and the feeling of being watched was now so bad that every hair on my body was standing, and then I hear the same two-tone whistle very loudly in the tree line directly behind me. I had the hose off at the exact same time, so I whipped myself out from under the cab and turned ready to throw down with a 1/5/8 wrench in my hand, yelling, "All right, where are ya?" But there was nothing. No one there, no tracks, no eyes, no wind either. In fact, no sound whatsoever, which was really strange. The flashlight that I had was more of a small floodlight for working on repair stuff, so it didn't really light up inside the trees or anything. But the next day, it had snowed another 6 inches or so I went up and hiked the tree line with a 12 gauge and 7 3-inch slugs ready to go. But there were no tracks that I could see, no perches on the trees where snow had have been pushed off or anything, if it was a bird. Nothing. But I definitely heard someone whistle, or make a whistling sound of some sort. As I said, I'm an avid hunter, and animals just don't make that sort of noise. I don't know. The whole situation was really weird, and I don't know what to think about it. Maybe I'm just overreacting, and maybe it was an animal, one that I just haven't come across yet or something. In any case, years later, this all happened about maybe 7 kilometers down the road from the last incident. I was out hunting with a friend when we lost legal light, so we hiked back to the truck and we hit the road in his parents' new Ford half-ton, the ones with the sensors all over the vehicle. We had some music playing as we're just heading back towards town again when the music started acting sort of weird and cutting in and out with static, so me being in the passenger seat, disconnected the Bluetooth and reconnected the phone. Music cleared up and we continued down the road. We got up to the kilometer board on the road that my previous encounter took place, and I mentioned, "Oh, hey, that's the whistle block that we logged a couple of years back," half jokingly because I couldn't make heads or tails out of it. My friend replied, "Great, thanks for that," as I told him the story before. But we continued slowly driving down the road because it gets pretty rough in a couple of spots, and the road has a few sharp turns and an S-bend as well. Well, we go about a kilometer further and the music starts screeching and doing what we can only describe as like alien noises. So I disconnect the Bluetooth again and my friend says, "Oh, Mum's got a cord in here somewhere." So he stops and gets the cord for me. I plug the phone in and play the music again. Another kilometer down the road and the phone just goes absolutely mental. I mean, like loud alien squealing and sounds similar to that terrible dial-up internet noise from the 90s. We had started into the S-bend when this was happening, and we shut the music off completely as we were driving still, making the one half of the S-turn, and then we both look up from the music deck or screen, and the headlight illuminates what I can only describe as a figure standing in the middle of the road. So we swerve and take the ditch a bit, still going probably, 30 kilometers an hour, and get the truck back up on the road. But we continue coasting down the road as we're both in awe after just seeing a flash of whatever this thing was. And I finally say after what seemed like 5 quiet minutes, "Man, did you just see that?" My friend cuts me off and says, "A skeleton in the middle of the road?" I say, "Yeah, like a white rib cage, and a deer skull for a face almost." He finishes. I said, "Turn around. What was that? Does someone need our help?" not thinking that we're in the middle of nowhere, with no vehicles around, mind you, or any that we had passed from other hunters or anything. It was early season and no one bow hunts here anyways. My friend said, "I'm not turning around. Man, I feel sick, like I'm about to throw up." And he continued driving, thankfully without throwing up. We didn't see another vehicle until we hit pavement again. So, whatever this thing was, it was taller than the pickup by easily a couple of feet. I'm 6'1" and my forehead is at the top of the window for reference. It has black surrounding the white of the bones with sort of long arms half stretched to its side, and it was standing there as if to say, "Try and hit me." I watched this thing pass the passenger window and stared up at it as we wailed by it, and it was definitely three-dimensional, tall with long arms and incredibly dark, dead-looking, sort of like, I don't know, maybe it was just my eyes, but like light was sort of sucked into it without reflecting anything. Hard to explain, but that's the best way I can put it. When we hit service again, though, my friend received a text message from his mother saying, "What did you two idiots hit in my brand new truck?" I guess the new Fords send near-accident reports to the owner when the sensors pick up something. I'm an old-school Chevy guy, so I don't really know much about this, but the only thing that I can find online that resembles what we both saw, and I know this is pretty cringe, but is, well, a Wendigo, just without the antlers. Or just that the headlights, perhaps, didn't illuminate them or something. So I live with my dog and my roommate in a one-story duplex. I've got a fenced-in yard, and the private spot where my car parked is accessible via an alleyway with a bunch of massive signs saying no parking, no trespassing, private property, and whatnot. So I was sitting in my bedroom playing games, and it was around 12 or 1 in the morning, and my dog, sitting on the couch in the living room, started barking at something outside. Every now and then, she does this because there's a squirrel or a bush moved or something. So I get up to go and shush her, and I open the blinds on the window to say, "See, there's nothing outside." But actually, there is something outside. Through the fence, I can see the headlights of a car idling out in the front of my house, and lights sort of bobbing around outside, and what appears to be people walking around in front of my yard by my car with flashlights looking around, in the middle of the night, mind you. For full disclosure, I was also kind of stoned, and I'm not sure if it's a reverse effect because my sober self is an anxiety-ridden creature living under a blanket who is too scared to send an email to my manager, but my high self is Fred from Scooby-Doo pretty much, as in, come on gang, let's solve the mystery. So I decide that I'll just go out there and investigate. I let my dog out with my pajama-wearing, unarmed, braless self out there. My yard is fenced, so my dog cannot go to them without me opening the gate, but she does keep barking, and step outside and I go to the gate. I can now see it's a well-dressed woman and a man in a sort of nicer, newer model car. They're walking around the front yard with flashlights, and I go, "Hey, this is private property. Can you please leave?" The woman seems kind of startled and says, "Oh, sorry, our car broke down." The man gets in the car and she walks around, goes back in the car. They talk for a while. I'm really not sure what else to do at this point, so I just kind of stand there watching for what felt like ages, but maybe it was only a minute or two. I don't know how long it actually was, but they seem to be deciding what to do, and he starts the car back up. They pull out, proceed to drive around, pull into the public street and park behind my neighbor's car instead. I decide to sit outside from my porch and kind of watch them, to make sure that they didn't get out and start investigating the neighbor's car instead. And they never popped the hood of their car, mind you, or got out, which seemed to run fine when they drove off, by the way. I never saw them come back either. A couple of notes here too is that there are loads of spots you can park in and around my neighborhood that would not be on clearly private property, with better lighting, and you do not need to be near other cars there too. But to get to where my car is parked, You've got to drive down an alleyway and look for a spot, like my friends have trouble finding it. The car was like a newer model sports car, mind you. Not saying that those can't ever break down, but I guess that I'd be less suspect if they just rolled up in like a Geo Metro, Mini Cooper, or an old Subaru hatchback or something, and were like, oh man, my terrible car broke down. When I sobered up the next day, though, I was like, I either just politely told some car thieves to stop attempting robbery on me, and they did, or I made someone's terrible night even worse. I mean, they didn't seem to be dressed for stealing a car, more like a party or a date night. The woman was in heels, for instance, and I really don't know much about cars, so maybe they really did just break down and the spot next to my car was the closest they could find or something. But then I maybe spooked them even more by taking neighborhood watch a little too far, and I guess if I parked in a neighborhood and a half-naked woman and her possibly big scary dog came outside to stare at me in the middle of the night, I'd probably get out of there too. But I don't know, something about the whole situation just didn't sit well with me. I mean, why did they have torches out like that, and what were they looking for? It just seems really strange and doesn't seem to match up with anything that I can come up with. So I'm having some very strange things happening to me lately that are really starting to legitimately scare me now. I live on a farm in the middle of SC USA, and I'm a cigarette smoker, so I go outside at random times at night, and I usually am okay with it, just usual sounds, but every once in a while I'll hear something like strange noises, but just sort of brush it off. But lately, within the past month, it's gotten a heck of a lot worse. For instance, I'll be sitting on the porch and I can hear voices of people talking, which sound very close, which is obviously unnerving to say the least. But last night, it was way worse. The voices started sounding like people I know, which they don't live anywhere near me. They live in other parts of the country or in different countries altogether. And well, the other night it sounded like someone was approaching me from my right, and it kept getting closer until I stood up and I pulled my pocket knife out and went to the stairs on the porch, and as I did that, whatever it was ran. It sounded like 2 feet running off into the woods. Last night, though, it got super close, whatever it was, like at the end of the porch, and I also heard breathing. It was terrifying, so I just instantly went inside. I got curious at this point, though, and video chatted my girlfriend. I went back out and we were listening together, and I swear that I heard something that I've never heard around here at all. I heard a little kid singing, which eventually turned into an adult laughing, and then like 2 minutes of wailing that moved slowly through the woods, just out of sight, so I couldn't see who it was. She didn't hear it, which obviously she's on a video chat, so maybe she just didn't hear it, or I don't know, maybe I'm going mad or something. I don't know if I'm being messed with by people or something more serious, or if it's just my own mental health. If anyone has any ideas of what this is, then please let me know, because I'm almost at the point of just getting in my car and leaving and never coming back. Also, I forgot to add too that there's a cemetery at the end of our yard, which I believe has 2 children and 2 adults, judging by the size of the tombstones. Whoever they are, those tombstones are really old, and I don't know if that means anything, or if, like I said, perhaps I'm just losing it. So I, a 25-year-old female, have always remembered these experiences from my childhood as the most confusing and scary times growing up. My brother is 3 years younger than me, and this all started happening when he was around 4 or 5. We can call my brother B, and B as a child had health problems and needed a lot of different surgeries that he was in and out of hospital often with. The way my mum will retell this is that this all started with my brother having a horrendous night terrors, so bad that he would sit upright in bed with a blood-curdling scream, thrashing his arms and legs around. When B would wake up, he would have no recollection of his dream, but as time went on, B started to talk to someone at night, and his toy fire trucks would start to light up with the siren going off too. My mum would wake up in the morning and the clocks would all be set to 2:15 a.m, which was really weird. In our house too, we had a storage room under the stairs. The storage room was right next to B and I's playroom. B would always say that John and his mum lived in that storage room, and he would go and knock on the door and say, "Hi, John's mum, can John come and play with me and my sister?" I never really thought too much of it, being a child, and my parents telling B that he had an imaginary friend. B would want us to set up an extra plate for John at the dinner table, buckle him into the car, etc., and would freak out completely if my parents didn't comply. We had weird things going on in the house though too. My baby dolls would go off non-stop to the point that my mum took the batteries out and shoved the dolls in the bottom of the toy box, and one in specific still went off, even without batteries, which I didn't even know how that's possible. We also had this motion sensor, a Big Bird plushie that constantly went off when nobody was in the room, and the toy would be turned off all the time too. This went on for at least a year, I think, and my mum has said that the breaking point was my brother crying in the kitchen, saying him and John apparently got into a fight, with B saying, "I told John that we can't be friends anymore because I have bones and he doesn't." That same night too, I woke up to a woman calling my name and standing at the side of my bed. When I rolled over and opened my eyes, she immediately asked me, "Where's John?" I didn't reply, and she seemed to get upset and asked again, "Where's John?" I again didn't reply and was so scared that I just rolled over and closed my eyes, hoping that it would go away. When I rolled back over, she was gone. I remember I booked it into my parents' room. My mum let me sleep in their bed for the night, but the next night, I remember my mum talking to a priest and another strange man. My mum has since told me that the priest was there to bless the house, and the other man was a medium to help John and his mum cross over. The medium was able to tell my mum that John and his mum had passed away in a house fire, which has always messed with me because the main toy that went off was B's fire truck, remember? I mean, it was set off almost every night. Was John trying to tell us something? But apparently he had attached himself to B the last time he had surgery. After the blessing and the encounter with the medium, John and his mum were never encountered again, not even by my brother. I really don't know what to make of most of it, but all I can say is that if John and his mum were not just imaginary, then I do hope that they found their way to the light. So basically, I was raised very Christian, strict Christian, and have never really believed in ghosts, but I do believe in demonic entities or something that is definitely evil. Now that I'm older, I'm still on the fence about believing in ghosts, as in things that are spirits of dead people roaming about that have no ill intent. Even with this belief though, I still loved a good horror movie, and admitted that a lot of other people's encounters were hard to explain if the paranormal entity in question seemed harmless. It's important to remember this part too, because it's a part of the story. So when I was in high school, I was best friends with a girl who was a little bit weird, and she was the definition of pretty much a pick-me girl. Her name was Amanda, and I would stay at Amanda's house basically every weekend, and after we graduated I was there pretty much 24/7. Never once did I feel weird in her house or anything, but one day, Amanda calls me basically in tears, insisting that someone has broken into her house and that she hears footsteps and banging, and I told her that I would come over and check it out because I lived literally like 2 minutes down the road from her. I show up and the doors are all locked. I, being an idiot, jokingly start kicking on the doors, yelling out, calling for any serial killers to come out. It made her laugh and feel better, and to be honest, it kind of made me feel better too. Weeks passed though, and we forgot about the situation and we just go on with our lives. When suddenly, Amanda is telling me how her dad finally fixed the upstairs bathroom shower where her bedroom is, and that every time that she uses the shower, she feels like she's being watched and the lights flicker and it really creeps her out. I play it off as her just being spooked or trying to creep me out or something. But then another time, her mum is talking to me and tells me that she got spooked because the door to that bathroom got stuck and she said that it felt like someone was holding it shut. Again, I play it off as just something that can be scientifically explained. Their house was split level and her parents basically had the entire downstairs and their kids had the upper level. But there were 2 rooms that suddenly started bothering me, and it was the upper living room and the laundry room downstairs. Every time that I'd go upstairs, I would swear that I saw a black figure in the corner of my eye, and every time that I would go into the laundry room, it was eerily dark, even with the lights on, and freezing cold, even in the middle of summer. It was weird, but in the end I just sort of avoided those areas, and I had read something about how the sound vibrations can cause people to think that they see something that's not really there, or something along those lines. Point is that it made me feel better, and the laundry room I figured was just because it had concrete flooring, so it was cooler. But one night I had come over late after work, and Amanda went downstairs to take a shower. I had laid down on her bed with her door open and my back turned, and I just got this awful feeling of being watched all of a sudden. You know how sometimes you can almost hear when someone is sneaking up on you? Well, I had that feeling. I immediately sat up and looked at the doorway, convinced that it was her brother messing with me or the dog had come upstairs or something, but when I did, there was nothing there. But I just could not shake that feeling though. It felt like someone was literally walking in through the doorway and staring holes into me, and at any second, something scary was about to happen. I sat there for probably 2 minutes just staring, debating if I should book it, pray, or scream. It felt like forever, but I finally heard Amanda coming out of the bathroom, and immediately that feeling just faded. I told Amanda straight away about this, and when she hears it, she kind of brushes it off and says that it's her grandpa's ghost and he likes to mess with people in the house apparently. I remind her of all the horrible things that had been happening lately, and she tells me that her mum had bought some sage or something and was going to sage the house to get rid of it, but had a dream where her dad came to her and said that it was him just playing and decided that she wouldn't sage it after all. I'm obviously pretty creeped out at this point, but decided that it's too late for me to drive home and just decide to sleep in bed with her. But that night, I have absolutely the worst nightmares I've ever had. Like being chased in the dark, weird voices saying stuff that I don't understand, something wanting to kill me type nightmare. I wake up, tell myself that I'm just freaking out, but from that day on, I just kept getting them and they got worse too. It wouldn't be every night, but it was often enough to bother me. One night I was sleeping at my boyfriend's house and had a sleep paralysis type nightmare too, where something opened his bedroom door and crawled in on the ceiling. A picture alien but with a human head and long talons. I woke up halfway through unable to move and kept trying to call out for my boyfriend, but instead fell back asleep and the dream picked up right where it left off. I text Amanda's mum and she reaffirms that there's nothing evil in her house. It's her dad and he was just playing pranks on all of them. A few more weeks passed though, and I stopped going to Amanda's house because 1, well, the demons, and 2, Amanda starts acting really shady too. She's doing things that I don't like, such as sleeping over at my ex's house, sending me Snapchats of them together, constantly talking of him and just being a jerk. She also somehow figures out my new boyfriend's Twitch account and is constantly watching him stream, trying to get him to talk to her, asking for his Snapchat, number, Insta, etc. And at that point, I just sort of lose my mind about it and I cut all ties from her. And, coincidentally, or maybe not, I don't know, but the nightmares instantly stop. I don't know what to think about that, but I would like to know if I wasn't just having some kind of psychotic snap, and it was at a bad point in my life for sure, but the fact that her family knew about it and thought that it was a dead relative, just, I don't know, it makes my skin crawl. I used to participate in a group that did activities intended towards children. We usually went to neighborhoods to make games for the kids and so on, and on Halloween, we usually went to give candy to children while in costumes. That night, I was dressed up as the Joker. So I went to the rally point and met the other guys and girls with whom we were going to give candy. We were about 30 or 40. The night went as planned. We did some games, then we handed out some candies, and then we said goodbye. 3 of my best friends were there, and after the activities were over, we sort of sat on a bench and talked about random stuff. Eventually, we got to the topic of Halloween parties and how we never went to one. We really wanted to go to a Halloween party too, dance, drink, do teenager stuff. I'm kind of an introvert, but I've always tried to live my life, so when I'm old that I don't have to regret not doing stuff, and partying was definitely one of them. So I too wanted to go to a Halloween party. We called our friends, but nobody knew of any party around. Eventually we got in touch with our friend Lewis, who was 18 at the time, asking if he wanted to do something. He told us that he was going to round up a few people and then we could go out in 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, we went to a friend's house. We cleaned up, changed clothes, and then Lewis called us back. He told us to go to a park nearby to get together. We went and we reunited with 6 of his friends. 4 we knew and the other 2 we didn't, but they were nice enough. Thinking about what to do next because his house was now unavailable. We really didn't know what to do, so we ended up going to a skate park nearby to see one of them and do some tricks and stuff with his kind of eccentric skateboarding, and we were all in awe, but after a few minutes we got tired down. After that, we went to the cemetery to tell horror stories. Disrespectful, I know, but we were teenagers doing stupid teenager stuff. After that, Lewis said, "Do you guys want to go and drink?" And we all said, "Yeah, let's drink," and we went to a convenience store to buy some alcohol. I think I have to say that in Chile, people from 16 are expected, yet not legally allowed to drink, unless they were with an adult or something, and we were with people from 18 to 21 years old. Legally, adult age is 18 here, which is also the drinking age. But we had the alcohol, but we didn't have a place to go and drink it, so we went to a forest that was about 15 minutes outside of town. We couldn't really see much, so we had our phone flashlights on. When we got to a nice quiet spot, we lit up a fire. We made sure that there was no flammable material nearby, obviously. And in front of us was an open field. Behind us was a wall of bushes. And as the night went on, we spent hours listening to music, drinking, telling funny stories, laughing, playing tag at one point. It was a really good time. That is, until it wasn't. So before I continue, I think I have to explain what a flate is. In Chile, a flate is sort of like a gangster. They tend to form gangs, and those who are in gangs tend to be really violent and short-tempered. They usually carry firearms or knives at least. This is a really vague description that I'm giving, as not all of them are bad people, and some are very friendly in fact, but it serves the story, so I think that's all you really need to know. But anyway, after a while of dancing and drinking, we were kind of wasted, except for Lewis, his girlfriend, and her sister, all okay, which decided to remain sober in case something came up. We played hide and seek and tag, and it was really fun and a very good time, like I said. But then, while we were dancing, we heard something in the bushes. At first, we thought that it was an animal, like a rat or a bird, so we didn't think too much of it. We continued dancing around, and I remember seeing, clear as day, a stone suddenly coming at me a few centimeters away from my leg. I thought Lewis kicked it at first, and I told him, "Dude, stop kicking rocks this way." He laughed it off and thought that I was drunk and joking, I think. And while I was kind of wasted, I definitely still had my senses about me. But then I saw another rock going in front of my eyes. It was like in slow motion this time, and I looked up, and I saw on Lewis's face a sheer expression of horror. I suddenly got scared as well. The only thing that he said to me was, "Run," and I was like, "What?" And he screamed at me, "Dude, run! Someone's throwing rocks at us." I ran back to town, to the houses and the lights. Behind me, people were screaming, "Run and hurry." I ran as fast as I could. I was kind of drunk, like I said, and the terrain was really muddy, so it was difficult. It was also really dark, and I couldn't see really where I was going. All I knew was that I was running towards the lights. I ran until I reached the same spot where we came from in town, and then I waited. I was alone and nobody came. I didn't know where my friends were, but after a while a friend of mine showed up. He screamed at me, "Dude, give me your jacket or something. They hit Fred on the head." When they came closer to the light, I saw him helping the others walk. Upon seeing his face, blood was running down everywhere and dripping. I immediately gave him my jacket and called an ambulance. Then some of my other friends came, one by one. They all went to Lewis's place because it was nearby. Then Lewis came. "Where's my girlfriend and my sister-in-law?" he said. I told him that she didn't come through. We sent everyone to his house and waited for the two missing people. We were ready to go and face the people throwing rocks in case they were doing something to them, but then, thankfully, they appeared. His girlfriend was hysterically screaming. "They hit my sister. They hit her. She's bleeding." We went to her, and the whole side of her face was just covered in blood. We rushed her to Lewis's house and made sure that we were all there. We were, and so we calmed down a bit, but when the ambulance came, the two who got hit went there with them, and we then called the cops. Now, I remember some of us being in shock, others were angry, and others were kind of in the middle ground. Lewis was raging, saying those stupid kids and so on and so forth. We didn't know who threw the rocks, obviously. I thought that we got into the terrain of somebody without knowing, and the owner tried to scare us away or something, but my friends told me that they saw a group of people hiding in the bushes. We left everything at the bonfire, the skateboards, the speaker, the wallets even. For me, I had everything safe, which I was grateful for, but for others, they obviously lost stuff. But Lewis then told me and my friends, "Dude, let's go find these guys." I was mad, but most of all, I wanted to try and retrieve some of the stuff that people had left there, so I told him that we should go, but if there were too many of them, then we should turn back. He called two of his friends, and in 5 minutes they were with us. I knew them because of some school stuff, but they were very loyal, and they both went to the gym and were pretty big fellas, so I felt safe when they came. Eventually, we went out to look for the people who threw the rocks, and when we were about a block away from the forest, we saw them, walking with our speakers, the skateboard, and other stuff that we left there. It was almost like a Mexican standoff. We were a block away from them, and we just sort of stared at each other. There were like 15 of them and only 6 of us, so in the end we didn't really do anything and just turned back. But as we got a good look at them, they were clearly gangsters, so they probably had guns and knives, which was one of the reasons why we didn't confront them. But when we got back home, we actually ran into the police car, and there were 2 of them. One got out of the car, and we told them that we called and explained the situation pretty quickly because we didn't want the guys to run away. However, the officer told us, "You're telling me that you're drinking, being minors, and then got attacked?" Well, we told him yes, and then he responded with the most upsetting stuff ever. "So you minors were drinking, having a bonfire in the forest in the middle of the night, and now are asking me to give you justice? Don't you kids realize how hypocritical you guys are?" I responded with, "We were in supervision of 3 adults, and not because we were drinking we deserve rocks being thrown at our heads." He looked at me with an expression of just pure hatred. I was really scared but angry as well, and he then repeated himself. We told him the guys were running away as we spoke with all of our stuff, but he kept saying that it was our fault, that it was our problem that we were in that situation to begin with. After a few minutes, though, the one inside the car told the other, "Hey, let's find the other people and then we can question these kids." And the other got inside. We waited at the house, but they never came back. And eventually, we all just went to our respective homes, and Lewis told us the next day that the policemen, they never returned. And so, that was the end of the night. It was a really scary moment, but when I remember it, it kind of makes me smile in a way too, because I have a good story to tell in moments like this. The two that got sent to the hospital, they did have to get some pretty serious stitches in their heads and were hospitalized for a couple of days because of how serious it was. But after a few days, we spoke of it like it was nothing, but we were really angry at the police, to be honest. We even speculated about whether or not they were in on it or something, because their behavior was really weird. But if you got this far, then thanks for listening, and hopefully I don't ever have to experience anything like this ever again. This is something that I really want to talk about, to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. For context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and my friends, we were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience that I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. I mean, occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood like liquid, and we'd see pentagrams on the ground from time to time from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad. That is, until the last time that I'd gone exploring abandoned buildings. When I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part of a mental hospital. A weird combination, I know, but it was closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. I was 15 when this happened, and most of my friends were the same age. When we got there, it was rather cliche, I guess. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain too. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it, and we made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was about to happen. We looked around the small place park with flashlights that we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited, but we decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys strewn about. But the further that we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I sort of all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were bold and cocky, but we all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested that we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor, and we sort of heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became really strong. But there was a hint of something else which I just couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in with our flashlights pointed in every direction, with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and the right were the occasional metal doorway, some of the doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic too, and it felt a little hard to breathe at some points. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and suddenly recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked. "I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now, though." To be honest, I thought that he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back, I think that he was completely honest. He backed out of the room, and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance, ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking toward the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something or someone was in the building. But we couldn't do that to him, and the closer that we got, the more that I felt like I was being watched. When, finally, we entered a room on the right which had the smell of what I can only describe as just rotting meat. And in front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. And that's when we heard whispers from somewhere. Ryan quickly shot around and shone his flashlight to the corner of the room, where there was a man with short hair standing with his head down. He had a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assumed was blood, and torn beige pants. He didn't have any socks, and his feet seemed sort of damaged. He was sort of twitching sporadically too, and continued to mumble, even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked up at us with what I will never forget, a haunting grin that just sent shivers immediately down my spine. And he said, "You guys here for the feast?" This kicked us over the edge, and we immediately bolted out of that room all the way back down to the daycare center. The door, thank God, was still open, and we decided to try and slam it shut behind us, but the rust and the pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our might to close it, but we eventually got it there. And just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature that I could see in the dark from that distance. As we sat behind the metal door catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all just saw the same thing, after a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. It was at that point that we decided it was well and truly time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely, and we pretty much just ran the whole way home. Police went back to do a routine search of the area, and they actually found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it was closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sicknesses from eating raw meat, apparently, and his mental condition was much worse than before. There were rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has ever been confirmed. But apparently people have gone missing there or something. But anyway, in the end, guys, just be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. Be smarter than we were, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. This encounter would have happened a little over 10 years ago now, I would guess. I would have been 26, 27 at the time. I'm male, but I cannot 100% remember what year it was now. I think it was sometime from 2011 to 2013. At the time, though, I was frequently going out with my friends to bars and parties and just hanging out until pretty late most weekends. The friend's house that I usually hung out at was on a side street, just off of a main road where a lot of popular and crowded bars and restaurants were. You had to park on the street at his house, and during the weekend when it was busy, it was pretty common to have to park a number of blocks away. But the street closer to the bars was pretty nice. If you went a few blocks in the opposite direction, it got a little sketchier at night though. Anyway, after hanging out one particular night, I had to walk back to my car pretty late, which was parked a number of blocks away towards the slightly sketchier area. This was during the winter, so I was wearing some kind of heavy sweater or pullover and a beanie or knit hat. This detail is only important as you couldn't really gather much idea about what I looked like from a distance in the dark, aside from my general height and build, I guess. There wasn't much through traffic though as you got further away from the bars, and the roads were pretty dark without any streetlights too. As I was walking down the sidewalk, a car started slowly creeping down the street, matching my pace as it pulled up beside me and then stopped. The window of the car rolled down, and driving the car was an attractive young woman who said that I looked cold and that I should let her give me a ride to where I was going. She seemed friendly enough. I indicated that I wasn't parked far away and appreciated the offer, but was going to just keep walking anyways. She then tried really hard to convince me to get into the car with her, since it was so cold. No small talk to establish any information about me, mind you, to make sure that I wasn't a weirdo, just asking me to get into the car pretty aggressively. Based on what I was wearing and how dark it was, there was no way that she could really have had much idea about what I actually looked like to possibly find me attractive. And even if she did, I didn't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight when they're alone in the car like that. There were about 10 cars nearby she could have gone to if she just wanted to pick up a guy. There was no reason that I could think of that she would have to resort to driving around offering to pick up strangers. She continued to drive alongside me though and offered me a ride again, which I declined and just kept going. I picked up my pace and she eventually drove off. But as soon as she was a few blocks away, I quickly got to my car and made sure that there was nobody lurking around or close by. But I don't know, the whole scenario just felt so off and didn't make sense to me. I asked my friends about it later and all of the women agreed. They wouldn't offer a random guy a ride at nighttime. They wouldn't offer a random guy a ride at nighttime in that kind of scenario, even if the guy did look like Ryan Gosling. My suspicion is that there was someone laid back in the back seat or something of the car out of view with a weapon, waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't really figure out any reason that she would be offering rides like that to complete strangers in the middle of the night, as it would be very unsafe for her to just pick up random strangers like that. I just assumed that there had to be something nefarious going on in that car, and I do wonder what would have happened if anyone would have just hopped in there with her. This story happened to me back when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time and had 3 siblings that also lived at home, my brother and 2 sisters. For some context, we lived on 5 acres in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by woods and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad normally left for work at like 2 in the morning, so I had always felt like it was my job to be the man of the house, because he was gone during the times when you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was the weekend, my dad was home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms upstairs, and coming out of our rooms, you would sort of look down over the banister to see our front door. When I woke up, it took me a few moments to get out of the haze and realize what was going on. I looked at the clock, and it was around 2:30 in the morning, and my brother told me that there were 2 men at our front door. Of course, now, this is a real wake-up call, obviously, so I was pretty much awake now. But we quietly walk out of my room and peek over to look down at the front door. When we looked, there was no one at the door, but I noticed my parents off to the side, out of view of the glass on the front door. I whispered down to my dad, and he told me that there were 2 guys who had been talking to each other and knocking on the door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my pistol, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure that they weren't at the door anymore. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs, as it is in direct view of the door. My brother is right behind me as we sort of head over to where my parents are, whispering to try and find out what was going on. My parents had woken up to our dog barking apparently and come out to see these 2 men knocking loudly at the door. At this point, we see the men return and they begin knocking again, despite the fact that nobody had come to the door and our dog is still actively barking. The fact that they were there at this time, in a location where houses are spread out hundreds of yards, and still knocking while the dog was barking, made the situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men walk away and we all shuffle across the kitchen into the family room to peek out of the windows into our driveway, which is lit up by our outside light. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but nobody inside from what we could see. Immediately the question was, where did those guys go? They weren't in their car and they were no longer at the front door. Unfortunately, we figured out the answer when the handles on our back French doors started jiggling. They were actively trying to enter the back of our house, which enters into the kitchen. At this point, I just remember my mum frantically saying David, as pure terror overwhelmed her. Two things happened as well. Adrenaline filled my body as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might actually have to shoot these men. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed the phone, called the police, and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute of jiggling, they stopped at the back door and disappeared again, only to return to their knocking at the front door. However, at this point, several minutes had gone by and suddenly we saw the local police fly up in multiple cruisers with their lights on. As they whipped into our driveway and front yard, the two men bolted away, attempting to run the long way around the house across the driveway. One of them disappeared out of view, but the other one was intercepted by an officer yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't, and he was immediately tased and fell on the ground. Some of the officers went around the house after the other guy, and one of them came to talk to my dad as we came out of the front. They ended up finding the other man hiding in my sister's little playhouse in the backyard, and it appears that both of them were drunk or high or something, as one of them had actually hid cocaine on himself, and while they were both arrested that night, we actually never did find out what they were charged with or what happened to them in the end. Needless to say, the whole experience was not fun, and it's definitely something that I do not want to go through ever again. So, I, a 26-year-old male, have had what I believe is either two paranormal experiences or maybe my mind is playing tricks on me. When I was in year 10, around 15 years of age, around 2011-ish, I was staying up late on a Saturday night. I was chilling in the lounge watching Comedy Central on TV under a blanket. It was winter in New Zealand. Around midnight, as I was watching TV, I saw what resembled a young boy with a bowl-styled haircut, and what I can assume is eyeless sockets just pop out by the front door, which was maybe 10 feet from where I was sitting. I won't deny that my heart was wearing its brown pants that night. I slowly got up, wrapped my duvet around like it was going to protect me. Then this little person disappeared in front of my eyes. I proceeded to basically put the light switch through the wall as I turned the lounge light on for protection. I slowly peeked around the corner to see if he was still there, but no, he was gone. I'm not sure why I slowly searched the house looking for him as my family slept, but in the end I found nothing. The next day, as I was in the lounge with my family, I saw in the corner of my eye at the end of the hallway that same little boy go from what was our wash house walk into what was our cupboards. Yes, like a full-body apparition. I told my mother, who was sitting next to me, about it, but she told me that she saw him a few days prior and had invited him into the lounge at one point, apparently. And well, we moved shortly, a few months after that. The second experience, though, was around COVID. My family and I had to move from a house that we lived in for nearly 10 years because the landlords were selling it. Again, I was watching TV late at night and I decided to go to bed at around 1 in the morning, so I walked to where my room was at the end of the house in total darkness. I knew the layout of the house like the back of my hand. And as I turned, I go into my room. I bumped into something. I suddenly looked in front of me and there was what I can only describe as a shadow of a person that was kind of, well, darkness that was blacker than the blackness of the night. The odd thing, though, about this shadow was that it was taller than I am. For context, I'm 6'2", and I weighed about 90 kilos. And this shadow was huge. it wasn't like I was mistaking it for something either. I, for some reason, just apologized for bumping into it, and I said, "Sorry, mate," not thinking that maybe this shadow person could have been a person who entered the house unlawfully or something, but after said realization, my heart put on its brown pants again. I wasn't as brave to go looking for said shadow person on this encounter, and I proceeded to hide in my bed under the covers like the big coward that I am. So for this, I'm going to refer to my friends as bridemaid of honor and niece because this was a bachelorette trip. It will be a year in March when my friends and I went to Chattanooga, TN, to celebrate my childhood best friend's marriage. It was a beautiful house on the Tennessee River, very private and peaceful atmosphere. It was on a nature trail, so it felt very isolated, though it was close enough to the city for us to go out and have some fun too. Anyway, we all had a great time in the city, then came back and started a fire in the fire pit. We hung out until we got tired and eventually we went to bed. We all decided to bunk in the same room that had 3 double bunks and 1 full bed. It was a large room and we thought that we could all watch a movie together in there, but ended up all deciding that we needed sleep to drive back the next day. As my friends are used to falling asleep early, I'm not, so I was still wide awake as they were sleeping. I got my phone and I started scrolling. I know it's a bad habit, but I had really no other options of reading a book or anything. As I'm laying there, I just get this feeling all of a sudden, and it's not a good one. I have had one paranormal experience before this, and it didn't make me feel scared. I just felt a bit confused, I guess, but this was different. I felt my hair stand up, like that feeling of something with ill intent was near me. I look up at the other bunks, my friends look fine, so I continue scrolling, and then I get the feeling again, and I look up, and this time I look towards the full-size bed, where the bride and her little niece who tagged along were, and I see a dark figure, head bent down, looking down at the niece. And my heart stopped. I couldn't move. I kept thinking to myself that it's just a shadow from the stairway light coming in the room, surely. I look down at my phone, and eventually I get the courage to move my thumbs to text my boyfriend how scared I was, which didn't help considering that he's not a believer in anything of that nature, so he just says that you're just seeing things. But after this, I look up and the figure is gone, which didn't make me feel any better, only worse, because it only confirmed that what I saw was in fact a shadow from something and not a light in the stairway or anything. So I jumped up from my bunk and bolted up the stairs and crashed on the couch, and I just felt like a small kid who just watched a horror movie. I also kept hearing what sounded like creaking from the stairs. I thought of the old phrase, "It's just the house settling," to try and calm myself. Then I called my boyfriend and he talked me down, and I thought that he was probably right, but I was still shaken up. Eventually I fell asleep at around 4 in the morning when the creaking stopped, but woke up at around 6, and I got the courage to go downstairs to get into my bag for clothes, and a few minutes after, the maid of honor comes up and she looks confused and kind of freaked out and then says, "Hey, did the bride come up here at all?" I said, "When?" Because I only slept 2 hours and I've been up since like 6 o'clock. She then says, "Well, I mean, about that time, I could have sworn that I saw her up and go up the stairs." I said, "No, I don't think she came up here." She says, "Well, I know I saw someone go up the stairs." Her face was white with fear, and I said, "Did you check the bed?" She then goes back down and looks and says in confusion, "She's in bed." And so I just stood in confusion and said, "Well, what time did you say you saw her again?" And she said that, "Well, only a couple of minutes ago. It's just 6:05. And I said, "Maybe you just heard me. I mean, I've been up here since last night." And she goes, "Well, I thought that I saw someone standing between their suitcases and the bed over her niece." That was when my heart dropped, and she knew that I hadn't been there. and I didn't have to say anything at all. My face said it. She knew that I saw it too, and needless to say, we were happy to get out and not investigate. I did feel guilty that I didn't stay downstairs with them to make sure that they were okay after she confirmed what I saw. However, I was convinced that it was just my anxiety, and my boyfriend being very skeptical made me think maybe I was just reacting, but the look on my friend's face of pure confusion and fear, it confirmed it for me. I don't know if it's related, but a few months later, I learned one of the supposed most haunted places in Tennessee, Hale's Bar, is located just 2 miles on the river from this location. Also, there was this really old cabin from the 1800s, and they had decorated it for looks on the property, and it definitely had some weird vibes to it. It didn't help, too, that they had these old pictures inside of it of the owners. I wish I'd remembered the names so I could see if they had any correlation to the Hales Bar Marina or something, but in any case, I won't be going back there anytime soon, that's for sure. When I was in high school, I took a glass-blowing course at a remote craft school called Snow Farm. It was located on the foothills of the Berkshire Mountains. It was a 2-week course, and our instructor was this guy in his early to mid-40s, who was really nice and actually quite ripped as well, but also very friendly. He wore glasses and a tank top to class every day, which revealed these thick scars on the back of his neck and shoulder, as well as a fully tattooed back. The most interesting thing about his appearance, however, was this sort of, like supervillain-esque scar running from the top of his forehead, down across his right eye, and ending at the bottom of his cheek. As the class got more friendly with him, a few fellow classmates and I asked him what his back piece looked like. He took off his shirt and revealed a vibrantly colourful tattoo of a dragon holding a box cutter. When we asked him about the significance of the box cutter, he told us an incredible story that I honestly wouldn't have believed had he not had the scars to prove it. He began by telling us that he was an amateur boxer for many years and was quite familiar with fighting. One day he was approached by a crackhead that started screaming at him and trying to fight. The crackhead was apparently trying to rob him. Our instructor at the time punched the crackhead and knocked him unconscious. He explained to us, though, that when someone is under the influence of crack cocaine, meth, or other intense stimulants, they develop almost superhuman abilities. I have heard stories like this since that corroborate this, and after knocking him out, he got right back up and kept at it. He knocked him out a 3rd time, and this time, the crackhead pulled out a box cutter and started slashing at our instructor's face, arms, and back. I'm not sure if the crackhead first attacked him from behind or maybe as he was walking away or something, because the scars on his back of his neck made it seem like he was slashed by surprise, but he knocked the crackhead out again, this time grabbing the box cutter and stabbing him over and over in the chest with it. He took off his shirt and tied it around his head to prevent the bleeding, and he told us that every time his heart would beat, blood would spurt out from his head, and he then hopped on his bike and rode 20 minutes to the nearest hospital. This story truly sounds like it's out of a movie, but our instructor later explained to me privately that he too was smoking and selling crack at the time. The fight was the result of a crackhead trying to steal his crack apparently, and I asked him if he thinks that he killed the guy, and he said that he had no idea because he left immediately afterward. I got to thinking about how deep of a blade one would need to pierce internal organs. I'm not really sure, but regardless, I thought that it was the most valid story behind a tattoo that I'd ever heard. He's been clean for years, and he even has a wife and kids now apparently, and him and his wife are quite successful in the glass-blowing or metalworking industry. So, to protect my client, I'll be calling her Mrs. Spooky because I'm too lazy to come up with a better name. But I, a 21-year-old female, started this job, being an at-home healthcare worker, back in September. The job at first was your pretty average job. All I basically had to do was to make sure my client was well taken care for and make sure that she had someone to talk to. everything was very normal up until I started picking up more shifts at night. I'm a college student. And one morning, I was getting my client's medication ready when her grandson, who lives with her, is about to walk out to go to work. Because he kept knocking over this can of Febreze, he then put the can of Febreze in between the couch cushions so it couldn't move. 10 minutes after he leaves, the can of Febreze jumps out of the couch cushions, does a flip, and lands straight upwards. I freak out for a second, but then I play it off and tell myself that there's a reasonable explanation. But it keeps continuing. Frames falling off of walls, people talking in the kitchen and hallway when nobody is home but me and my client, things being thrown at me even, the figure of a face smeared against the kitchen window, and even shadow people at times. But last night was definitely the worst of it. You see, I got there early yesterday because my client had a food package waiting to be put in the fridge. My client greets me with a smile, and I make her some mac and cheese after I put the food up. My client dropped her fork and asked me to wash it, so I did. While cleaning off the fork, I hear a can fall behind me, so I go to pick it up, and the scrub brush from the sink goes flying at me. Obviously, I'm spooked by that, but it's not the first time that this has happened, so I go back to hanging out with Mrs. Spooky. Things are pretty back to normal until I hear more things start to fall in the kitchen. I think to myself, maybe a cat snuck in again. So I go and turn on the kitchen light, but the light bulb bursts, and the house goes from a good 94, my client gets cold easy, to a cool 60-ish degrees. At this point, I'm hoping that there was just a weird power surge that has just turned everything off. But I rush back to my client. Everything is fine. No power outages, and it's still pretty hot in the living room. But then a shadow moves in the kitchen, and this time my client jumps back. Luckily, her grandson pulled up right after this, and even he was pretty spooked when I told him what had just happened. But that was one of the first times that I've ever seen her react like that, and that to me gave me confirmation that I'm not going crazy and that there's something in here. Maybe it's a ghost or a demon, or maybe someone has been in the house without anyone knowing it. All I know is that I'm absolutely terrified of going back to work there, and I really don't know what to do. When I was a kid, my mum and I lived with my grandparents in their 3-story house. It had a basement, a ground floor, and a second floor. And to give some context, there was a living room directly in front of the stairs, leading upstairs so that you could see my mum's room on the left, which is important for later, and my grandparents' room on the right. My room was further down the 2nd-story hall, but I spent a lot of time alone and with my uncle in the basement. For more context too, the basement was a huge rectangle with one room directly to the left of the stairs, my uncle's room, and one room in the far back left corner, storage room, also important for later. And so, with the context out of the way, here's the actual story. So this all happened when I was 8 or 9. I can't remember exactly, but it was around when Halo 3 came out. The first time it happened, it was honestly the worst. I was homesick from school. In reality, I just wanted to play Halo, but everyone in the house worked, so I was alone and my uncle was at school. The only Xbox in the house was in the basement, so naturally, when everybody left, I got up and went to go and play Halo. I'm down there for a few hours playing games happily, and all of a sudden, the storage room that I mentioned earlier creaks open ever so slightly. Not completely, but just enough to see a slit of darkness, and plain as day, I hear my mum call me from what sounded like the furthest corner of the storage room, saying that she needed help putting something away. My mum wasn't home at the time, and I knew this, but I didn't turn anything off, and I just bolted upstairs and laid on the couch until my uncle got home from school. He asked why I left the Xbox on, and he thought that I was sick and laughed at me, and I just laughed back and said, "My bad, won't happen again." The only other time this happened was actually during a family dinner that we had cousins and pretty much our entire family over for a holiday. My cousins and I were playing with Nerf guns in the living room, and they got hungry at one point and went to get some more food, so I sat by myself in the living room reloading my magazines with darts when something caught my eye upstairs. Same year as the last encounter, mind you. I'm still 8 or 9 in this scenario. It was my mum's room door, and it had opened, and because it was like 8 p.m, it was dark upstairs, and because no one was up there, so there were no lights on, but my mum had walked out from the darkness and kind of waved me over to her with a weird smile on her face. I yelled to her, "Why?" and she just kept waving me over, not saying a word. But I clearly saw my mum, so I didn't question her again and started walking over, but as I got to the start of the stairs, I looked to my right and I saw my mum talking with my aunt at the dinner table. So I walked over there and asked her what she wanted and if she'd been upstairs, and she said no. I immediately went back to the living room, looked up the stairs, and her door was closed again. Nothing like that ever happened again after that, but it still gives me the chills when I think about it. When I was a kid, my little sister and I were visiting my dad, my older brother and sister that lived with him, his new wife and her kids, 2 girls and a boy, in a small country town in southern Western Australia called Manjimup. There was only 3 bedrooms in the house, 2 at the front of the house and 1 at the back. My dad and his wife were in one of the front rooms, and my brother and stepbrother were in the other, which left the last room at the very back of the house away from the others for us 5 girls. This first night that we were there, it was a very hot summer's night, and the house didn't have any air conditioning, so being too hot to sleep, we were just sitting in our beds, just talking and catching up since it had been a few months since we had seen each other. But we had opened the bedroom window to catch the small breeze that was blowing, in the hopes of cooling the room down a little bit so that we could eventually sleep somewhat comfortably. We were all chatting away and giggling around 1 in the morning, and the rest of the household seemed to be sound asleep when suddenly my big sister Sandy told us to all be quiet and listen. When we did, we all heard what I can only describe as a very loud rubber band being snapped over and over again. It sounded like it was on like a loudspeaker as well. And what was even weirder was all the other night sounds that had stopped and the breeze was gone too. It was so still, apart from this rubber band noise. We started whispering to each other about what it could be, but really couldn't explain it. Sandy decided that we should go outside and see if we could see what it was, since it sounded so close. Stupid kids, I know, but we all agreed and we headed out into the backyard. Once there, the sound seemed to get louder for just a minute, then it started to fade away or even kind of move towards the front of the house. The backyard joined to the driveway without any fence or gate, so without saying anything to each other, we all kind of just started following the sound down the driveway. I honestly don't know why. I think we were all just very curious. Once we were out the front of the house, the sound suddenly stopped, and it was suddenly eerily still for just a second. And then a baby started crying somewhere out past the front yard on the other side of the road, which was bushland. At least when we talked about it later, this is where we agreed that it sounded like it was coming from. Again, we followed, but when we got into the middle of the road, it started sounding like it was coming from sort of all around us. My little sisters wanted to go back inside at this point, but Sandy was worried that one of our neighbor's toddlers had got out onto the road somehow. I don't know why this made sense to us, but we started walking up and down the road a few hundred meters each way, looking for any baby or toddler in the drainage ditches on the other side of the road, or the edge of the bush, but we just never seemed to get any closer or further away from the crying. After a few minutes, the crying just stopped, and again there was silence. We all stopped in our tracks and just looked at each other. I was holding my breath, but after a couple of seconds, all the normal night sounds and the breeze just started again like nothing had happened. Suddenly, though, we were all absolutely terrified and ran home as fast as we could, not stopping until we were back in bed and my sister Sandy had slammed the window closed too. After a little bit, we were able to kind of shake off what had just happened and go back to talking, but we never turned off the light or opened the window again that night. We also didn't get much sleep too. For the rest of our visit, we never opened that window at night, no matter how hot it was, which made our dad finally go buy a fan for the room, and we also brought in a lamp that we kept on all night just to make us feel a little bit better. My dad, stepmom, and brothers never woke up and never heard anything like what we did. None of the neighbors' kids had got out or were missing, so they kind of dismissed what we had said happened apart from telling us off for leaving the house at night. I think they thought that we had just scared ourselves telling spooky stories or something. We never heard either noise again, mind you, and my dad moved the family to another house about 6 months later, so we eventually stopped talking about it. This happened when I was about 12 or 13. I'm 43 now, and to this day I still have no idea what the original sound was from, why we felt like we needed to follow it, or if the baby crying was even related to it. But when I think about it, I still get freaked out. I mean, I just can't help but think that something was trying to lure us out of the house, and if so, why didn't anything happen when we did go outside? If anyone has any ideas on how to explain my experience, or even just what the rubber band noise might have been, then I would love to know, and please do share. 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 Please do share.